Journalists asked professional league players if there was anyone they would like to have on their team, and everyone answered without a second thought. Song Yu-young, the genius midfielder. This boy's life had always been about football, so much so that his favorite first birthday gift was a ball. He started training hard, and by elementary school, people were already calling him a football prodigy. He evolved so much that by high school, he was practically the football god of his school. Song Yu-young truly believed he was an extraordinary player. When he went to try out for the Dongju High School football team, he was overflowing with confidence, ready to show off his skills, leave everyone jaw-dropped, and become the star of the show. But things changed when he saw a guy who was simply phenomenal, possessing a powerful and precise shot. That was tryout number 16, Young Nim. The scout himself commented that his all-around attributes and finishing were perfect, sealing the deal that he was the guy. It was the first time in his life that Song Yu-jung tasted defeat, and it was a devastating blow because Young Nim was also a freshman, yet he played way better than him. But Song Yu-jung didn't let it discourage him, and made up his mind that no way in hell would he settle for being a mere background character. This rival made him truly push himself, and from that day on, he began training every single day, from the early hours of the morning until after team practice ended. No matter if it was raining or shining, he had only one focus. 6 months later, now 17 and playing as a central midfielder, he was outrunning his opponent on the field. But his pass turned out horrible. He was playing alongside Young Nim, who was the striker, and ended up unable to control the ball because of the mistake. Song Yu-jung apologized for the screw-up, but to make up for it, he accelerated even more and took on the responsibility of stopping the opposing team's counterattack. The rivals were completely clueless, wondering how that guy could run so much with that much energy, calling the kid a monster. When he finally managed to win the ball back, the referee blew the whistle for the end of the first half, starting the 15-minute halftime. Song Yu-jung chugged a ton of water, but he didn't even seem that tired. That's when Young Nim approached him to demand answers, asking what kind of shitty pass that was, and giving Song Yu-jung a smack on the head, telling him to practice his passing more, and use the time he spent sleeping or slacking off to train. Song Yu-jung thought to himself that the bastard had no idea how much he already practiced, and that Young Nim himself was to blame for all that effort. The striker then reminded him that there were only 2 months left before the selection process for the U17 World Cup, and warned him that if his friend really wanted to go, he better train like a madman. They were preparing for the 2009 World Cup in Nigeria, a prestigious international tournament organized by FIFA. Young Nim commented that if they shined in that World Cup, the whole world would notice their talent. But just thinking about training that pass so much already gave Song Yu-jung a headache. The warning came that it was time to go back to the pitch, and Young Nim urged his teammate to give it his all and not mess up this time, playing fast and direct to get something done. Song Yu-jung agreed, just going with the flow, but suddenly, he felt an absurd pain in his eyes. His vision went completely blurry, and he collapsed onto the grass. The first to see it was Young Nim, who panicked and shouted for them to call an ambulance immediately. Later, after the massive shock and a battery of tests, Song Yu-jung and his parents received the worst possible news in the doctor's office. The young man had a severe case of color blindness. The doctor explained that he was probably starting to feel the most severe effects right then, and asked if his world was in black and white, which was true, as the boy could no longer see any color. The doctor comforted the family, saying he managed to avoid going completely blind, but warned that from now on, his vision would worsen significantly, requiring maximum rest at home and strictly forbidding any activity that strained his eyes. Heartbroken, Song Yu-jung asked if he could still play football, and the negative answer made both him and his parents break down in tears. 15 years went by, and Young Nim was watching TV in disbelief, commenting, "For God's sake, how is a doctor going to make the team?" since that was the kind of news any football fan wanted to know. Meanwhile, Song Yu-jung, peacefully sipping his beer, asked what he, a mere office worker, had to do with that. Young Nim grumbled that he could hardly believe he used to play ball with someone who turned into such a corporate suit, and Song Yu-jung shot back, saying his friend was the one who chose their friendship, so now he had to deal with it. The television was showing a replay of Young Nim's highlights from last season, where the commentators narrated him as the pride of South Korea and the team captain. Song Yu-jung teased his friend, asking why they were still airing that, and guaranteed that if it were him out on the pitch, he would have scored about 5 goals by now. Young Nim called his friend crazy, and Song Yu-jung thought about how much his partner had caught the planet's attention since those U17 days. He always knew Young Nim was special, but he never imagined the guy would become the captain of Tottenham. The inevitable thought crossed his mind, and Song Yu-jung thought that if it weren't for his illness, things would be different. He gathered his courage and asked Young Nim where he thought he would have reached if he had kept playing. Young Nim wanted to know if his friend held any regrets, and Song Yu-jung confessed that he needed to hear it so he could maybe move on once and for all. Young Nim then grabbed his beer mug, chugged the whole thing down at once, and stated firmly that he was a hell of a midfielder, with a stamina and grit that were pure talent, and that if he had continued, he would definitely be an absolute starter. Song Yu-jung smiled awkwardly, saying he knew they were friends, but there was no need to exaggerate the compliment. But Young Nim was dead serious and added that if his passing were just a little bit better, he would be playing at a world-class level. Song Yu-jung found the irony funny and questioned what kind of midfielder midfielder doesn't know how to pass, saying that was just pure stupidity. Youngnim laughed, commenting that at least his friend had developed some self-criticism over time, but lamented their destiny, confessing that playing football with him was the most fun time of his life. Song Yu-jung felt a tightness in his chest, as he also missed those times dearly, and found out right there that Youngnim had even begged the coach to let his friend play again back then, calling the striker an idiot in a playful tone. Noticing that his partner was already pretty wasted from the alcohol, Song Yu-jung ended the night by putting the poor guy into an Uber to go home, grumbling that his friend should have just stuck to soda for being such a lightweight. When he was finally left alone in the silence of the street, Song Yu-jung couldn't get what Youngnim said about him being close to world class out of his head. This revelation only made the weight of regret crush his chest even harder, as the sky broke out into a sudden and heavy downpour. And Song Yu-jung couldn't help but think that if only it weren't for the color blindness, if he could just distinguish the jersey colors on the pitch, if his eyesight weren't so bad, and if the world around him hadn't turned into that endless gray haze, everything would be different. Deep in these melancholy thoughts in the middle of the street, he ended up crossing the avenue right when a truck was speeding forward. It remains a mystery whether the accident happened because he couldn't tell if the traffic light was red or green due to his vision, which would make total sense, or if the truck driver was just purely stupid and a terrible driver. But what matters is that, right after the impact, the magic of destiny happened, and he went back to the past. Song Yu-jung woke up at the exact moment he had collapsed onto the grass because of that unbearable pain in his eyes. Looking up, he immediately noticed that the sky was blue, and he could see every single color perfectly again. He stared at Youngnim, who was standing right there looking way younger, and asked why he looked so youthful. Youngnim found the question bizarre, and replied that his friend had just dropped to the ground out of nowhere. Looking around, Song Yu-jung noticed that the crest on their jerseys was that of Dongju High School, and recognized that the field belonged to the school too. He considered that it could all just be a good dream, but the referee interrupted his thoughts, announcing that the second half was about to start. Worried, Youngnim said he would tell the coach that his partner wasn't in any condition to play, but Song Yu-jung firmly refused, and guaranteed that he was indeed going to play. He thought to himself that even if this was a delusion of his mind, it didn't matter, as long as he could finally kick a ball again. The moment he controlled the ball on the pitch, a wave of emotion hit him as he remembered how long it had been since he last felt that wonderful sensation, thrilled to see the world in full color again. Because of the awe, he ended up getting a bit distracted and stood still, allowing an opponent to charge straight at him. Except instinct spoke louder. Song Yu-jung masterfully dribbled past the marker, and unleashed that powerful sprint only he could do, feeling his body explode with a youthful energy that felt nothing like his previous life in his early 30s. The rival marking soon tightened up on him, while his team striker was running up ahead, calling for the pass. Spotting his teammate, Song Yu-jung thought about how long it had been since he last saw Ju Chan, and found the perfect gap to send the ball. It was at that exact instant that something very strange happened to his vision. A pillar shining in a gleaming golden hue appeared out of nowhere. Not knowing if it was a side effect of the color blindness or some other madness, he felt a spark of intuition that he should kick the ball exactly toward that light. Seeing the bizarre long ball, Ju Chan yelled, asking what he was doing since there was no one in that area of the pitch. But their other teammate, Hyung, appeared out of nowhere, shouting that he was right there, controlling the ball with class. Song Yu-jung's jaw dropped, wondering how the guy had gotten there so fast. Thanks to that pinpoint pass, Hyung slotted home a beautiful goal, leaving the midfielder radiant. He remembered all the past suffering of being barred from playing, but now, pure happiness filled his chest, making him celebrate like never before. At that moment, he hadn't realized it yet, but that mysterious light was going to change his life completely. By the end of the day, the scrimmage between Dongju High School and Sushin High School was over, and all the players bowed to each other in respect for a job well done on the field. A group of athletes leaving the locker room was already making plans to hit the LAN party, while others, completely wiped out from exhaustion, just wanted to head home. Song Yu-jung walked a bit apart from the rest, grinning from ear to ear all by himself. He had managed to play and realized that this real, physical sensation was no dream. He really had traveled back in time and could continue his football career. Seeing that, Hyung walked past him and asked why he was laughing to himself like a weirdo. Song Yu-jung just playfully replied that his big bro was in a good mood, receiving a grumble in return that big bro my foot. Even so, his teammate praised the play, and wanted to know how he had managed to dream up such a great pass. Song Yu-jung thought to himself that even he didn't know the answer, since the golden column had vanished right after, but he brushed it off, saying it must just be his talent finally blossoming. His friend accepted the excuse and moved along. Song Yu-jung asked where he was going in such a rush, and the other replied he was going home to rest, since there would be more heavy training the next day. The young midfielder had almost forgotten what his own house looked like, but he managed to find the way to his parents' apartment building, even after facing a little trouble getting his bearings. He dug into his memory for the door code, which was his birthday, and upon walking in, he saw that the home was exactly as it used to be, with his mom and dad looking much younger. When he greeted his father in an extremely formal manner, the man found the tone odd and asked if his son was getting sick. Song Yu-jung reflected that speaking that way had become an automatic habit after he grew older, but his mother mother cut the heavy mood short, saying everything was fine, and told everyone to sit down and eat. As she served the table, the boy noticed the massive amount of side dishes his mother always prepared, something he had lost the habit of seeing since he started living alone. However, the moment he tasted the food, he confirmed that the flavor was still absolute garbage, showing that his mother's lack of culinary skills remained identical. In the middle of the meal, his father questioned if he had already thought about the talk they had regarding whether he would stick with football or not. Song Yu-young recalled that, in the original timeline, his father wanted him to quit training to focus on his studies and eventually inherit the family company, which was exactly what he ended up doing in the past after discovering his illness. If it were the first timeline, he would give a vague answer saying he'd think about it, but this time he was decisive. He looked at his father and stated firmly that he had already made up his mind. He was going to keep playing football no matter what. He knew it was a waste to pass up on the company, but he was determined to live this second chance exactly the way he truly wanted to. The next morning, the coach split the squad into two teams for another scrimmage, separating the players into red and green pennies. Young Nim ended up on the same team as Song Yu-young and joked that he was ready to carry his teammate on his back, but reasoned that if the midfielder repeated the incredible pass from the day before, it would be the other way around. Song Yu-young remained silent, remembering the golden column and wondering if it would show up again. When the match started, the pitch looked normal, and he figured the light had been just a figment of his imagination. The game went on with the usual exchange of passes, and he kept his total focus on the ball, seeing nothing unusual. On an attacking play, Ju-chan controlled the ball on his chest and advanced dangerously toward the opponent's box, but was firmly blocked by the defense. Annoyed, the striker complained out loud that the defenders couldn't stand to see him shine. Smartly, Song Yu-young bolted forward calling for the pass and managed to control the ball, but the situation there was extremely tricky, as he found himself surrounded by three markers, two in front of him and one right on his tail. He assessed that the best case scenario would be to drop back a bit to reorganize the play, but at that exact moment of pressure, the golden column shone before his eyes once again. This time, the space targeted by the light was much smaller and narrower than the first time, indicating it would be a highly difficult pass. Without hesitating and trusting his own potential, Song Yu-young took the risk and made the pass, knowing he would never find out the result if he didn't try. The ball traveled precisely through the millimeter gap, and once again, Hyung appeared in the right place to receive the gift. The ball took an irregular bounce on the turf and popped up, staying at the perfect height for Hyung-min to volley it straight at the goal, but the opposing keeper was sharp and managed to make the save. Angered by the missed chance, Hyung-min immediately blamed the imperfections of the field. At the exact moment he watched his teammate's first shot, Song Yu-young finally understood what was happening and discovered the true purpose of that golden column. Later, after a fierce battle for possession, the ball loose in midfield, and the one who stepped up to claim it was none other than Song Yu-young. He thought to himself that if that finish from a few minutes ago had entered the golden zone exactly, Hyung-min would have definitely scored. That was when he unlocked the secret behind the glowing pillar. The first rule was that it only appeared when the ball was under his possession. At that same moment, he noticed that Hyung-min was already sprinting toward the box, ready to receive the pass up front. It was then that Song Yu-young realized the second rule of the golden pillar. The light only manifested when there was a real chance of scoring. The moment he delivered a precise cross into the box, the third and most important rule was confirmed in his mind. If the ball entered the golden zone, it was a guaranteed goal. Song Yu-young smiled inside, knowing that with such a refined ability, he would become a completely unbeatable player. And he wasn't the only one to notice this, as someone was already keeping an eye on his performance from the sidelines. The observer praised the killer pass, highlighting that the kid acted at the exact millisecond. The striker surged forward, showing instant decision-making and an enviable vision of the game. This man was none other than Lee Jung-hwan, the head coach of the South Korean U-17 national team, who decided he would keep a close eye on Song Yu-young from that moment on. Later, the friends gathered to celebrate the red team's victory. Hyung-min, while devouring his corn dog, stared at his friend and asked if he really was Song Yu-young, since his passing had improved in an absurd way, soaring way above his normal level. Song Yu-young found it funny and asked if he thought it was right to throw that kind of suspicion right in his face. Hyung-min justified himself by saying that a drastic shift in quality wasn't something that usually happened overnight, making the midfielder snap back, asking if he should just stop passing the ball then. The striker immediately denied it, saying it made no sense to stop, since his friend's passes were turning out way too beautiful. Savoring two corn dogs at once, since he had been gifted one, Song Yu-young reflected that, looking from the outside, he could understand his partner's suspicion. Just as Hyung-min pointed out, he had always played as a textbook box-to-box midfielder, a position where the athlete needs to run like a madman from their own box to the opponent's, helping out intensely in both defense and attack. This style was perfect for the old Song Yu-young, who possessed enviable physical stamina to run non-stop, which was his great strength. Suddenly transforming into a player focused entirely on cerebral passing was a bit absurd for anyone watching. In the middle of the conversation, Hyung-min mentioned to Song Yu-young that the U-17 national team coach had stopped by the school earlier. The midfielder knew exactly who it was, as Lee Jung-hwan was an extremely famous figure in the sports world. Back at that specific time in the past, the coach actually used to visit the school almost every day, but his focus had always been to closely monitor Hyungmin's development. The striker then encouraged his friend, saying that if he kept playing at that day's level and caught the commander's eye, the two of them could go to the U17 national team together. Song Yu-kyung already started daydreaming about the opportunity, promising himself that he would give it his absolute best. The next day, the squad was on the field doing a light warm-up, based on basic fitness training, something Hyungmin found tremendously boring. Suddenly, their routine was broken by the arrival of a bus carrying the squad from the Seoul Youth Academy team. No one had warned the players that there would be a match, and the surprise grew when the renowned Lee Jung-hwan stepped off right behind the visiting athletes. The Dongju High School coach went to greet them and commented that a match against a strong team like the Seoul Academy was always highly welcome, taking the chance to ask if Lee Jung-hwan had come all the way there to check on Hyungmin again. To everyone's surprise, the national team commander replied no, revealing that he had come to check out a few other things as well, while locking his eyes directly onto Song Yu-jung. He admitted it might be a bit of a last-minute request, but his intention was clear. A short while later, the Dongju coach gathered the boys in the locker room and explained that the fitness training would be replaced by a high-stakes friendly against the Seoul Academy, pointing out the starting lineup already set on the board and telling everyone to head out for a 10-minute warm-up. Meanwhile, Song Yu-jung was distracted, chatting in the corner with Hyungmin, questioning the real reason Lee Jung-hwan was there, and warning his friend to be careful, as he would definitely be closely marked by everyone in the game. However, Hyungmin replied with a confused look, saying there was something very wrong with the lineup. When they checked the starting lineup, the shock came. Hyungmin was not starting the match. The absence of the team's star left the boys completely baffled, thinking that Dongju was screwed without their main striker. However, Coach Lee Jung-hwan, analyzing the squad from afar, thought to himself that he had engineered all of it on purpose. His intention was to test Song Yu-jung's limits, wanting to see if the boy could deliver those killer passes without the brilliance and positioning of a star like Hyungmin. The commander wanted the youngster to show his true talent as a midfielder and prove if he had enough grit and capability to carve out a spot in the under-17 national team. The referee blew the whistle, and the game started tight and physical between Dongju High School and the Seoul Youth Academy. In the country, there was an organization created specifically to scout and polish the next generation of football stars, the Youth Football Club. There were countless academy teams scattered around, but the Seoul U17 side, led by Lee Jung-hwan, was on a completely different level. The moment Song Yu-jung tried to press forward, the ball ended up going to the Seoul team's midfield, falling at the feet of a player with superior tactical reading, a true football nerd. This opponent began mentally calculating the distance, speed, and reaction time, even considering the effects of trigonometry to find the perfect space. The young man calculated the exact coordinates for his pass, and when he made the long-distance cross, the ball traveled perfectly and landed right on the visiting striker's foot, who finished it without giving the defense a chance, opening the score with a goal for the Seoul Academy. Yu-jung wondered what that had just been, realizing that the real reason behind the Seoul U17's dominance was precisely him. Oh Sung-min, the central midfielder known as the pass mathematician. The night before, Yu-jung had researched this guy and discovered that he was #1 in pass accuracy and the tournament's MVP, showing that when it came to passing, the guy was truly on another level. Since he played as a central midfielder, the same position as Yu-jung, he would be the main candidate for the spot in the U17 World Cup at that moment. If Yu-jung wanted to take his place, he would need an absurd passing quality, something that in the past would have been impossible, but now he had the golden zone and Hyungmin. Unfortunately, however, he was playing without Hyungmin in that match. He tried to pass to the center forward time and time again, but it simply wouldn't work because the guy was heavily marked and couldn't get to the ball at all. Seeing this, Dongjil High School striker Gu Do-gun even questioned what kind of passes those were, since Yu-jung had a 0% accuracy rate. Without Hyungmin, he couldn't see the golden zone, and without seeing that path, a killer pass was impossible, which meant he couldn't even dream of the U17 World Cup acting like that. In the midst of this desperation, he ended up getting distracted and stopped marking, and the one who advanced against him was precisely Seung-min, who not only dribbled past Yu-jung's marking with ease, but also crossed the ball into the box, making the Seoul team striker almost score a goal that went very close. Yu-jung thought that if that had been a pass to Hyungmin, he would have scored too, and began to doubt whether he could make that kind of play without his golden pillar. At that moment, Coach Jungwang even gave Seung-min a thumbs up, leaving Yu-jung desperate to see his rival gain that recognition, knowing that now he needed to make an even more incredible pass than his. In the stands, one of the players asked Hyungmin if he didn't think their midfield was being swallowed up, and Ju Chang commented that the situation was only this bad because the two of them weren't playing. Hyungmin agreed that, without their two main strikers, it was indeed hard to create chances, and because of that, the midfield was taking all the pressure. Ju Chang added that the other side still had the mathematician Sung-min distributing passes non-stop, which must be a living hell for them, assuming that it was already a lost cause. However, Hyungmin said he didn't think so, and it was right then that Yu-jung finally got a chance to counterattack. He dashed forward forward with everything, thinking that this was his big opportunity, because if he could slip a direct pass to Dogun, he would definitely catch the coach's eye. The opposing defense created a very tight lane for a pass, and another player further ahead even called for the ball, which would have been the smartest and safest decision there. But Yu Jung put it in his head that he had to take a risk to impress the trainer, and tried the direct pass to Dogun. The problem was that the ball deflected and landed right at the foot of one of the Seoul Academy players, who passed it precisely to the mathematical midfielder. Sungmin calculated the coordinates and sent a cross straight to the striker's foot, who rattled the net. Yu Jung felt the weight of the mistake, knowing that his blunder led to the opponent's goal, a fatal and terrible blow to his reputation. When the first half ended, he went to the stands completely desperate for having given away that counter-attack goal because of his horrible last pass, and the crowd really didn't like his performance. That was when his dear friend Hyun-min tried to cheer him up by bopping him on the head with a lollipop, a literal, real lollipop, and asked if he was doing that on purpose, trying to make those weird passes. Yu Jung snapped back, asking what he was talking about. After all, he needed to do his best to catch the coach's attention, but Hyun-min questioned why he insisted on only passing. Yu Jung insisted that he was good at passing, and Hyun-min, annoyed, broke the lollipop, and reminded him that he had already told him before what his true talent was, warning him not to blame him later, and that now he would have to find out on his own. That left Yu Jung intrigued, wondering if he really was good at something else. When the second half started, he stepped onto the pitch totally distracted, wanting Hyun-min to just tell him what his talent was, since he didn't know it himself. Hyun-min was right to criticize him, because Yu Jung got so spaced out that he lost his marking, and the ball went right past him. In that sudden realization, he thought that he couldn't let Sungmin's deadly passes carry that team anymore, and therefore he would have to intercept as many balls aimed at him as possible. He ran focused to mark, pressing every pass with impressive speed, moving from one player to another in a matter of seconds, and accelerating along with the ball so as not to let anyone receive it. In one play, Sungmin ended up breaking through the midfield and controlled the ball, but Yu Jung put it in his head that he needed to be even faster, continuing to intensely mark everyone who was about to receive from or pass to his rival. He was extremely annoying and relentless, running non-stop until Sungmin began to look completely worn out, panting and dying of exhaustion, with Yu Jung stuck to him the entire time. When the opposing striker finally received a pass from Sungmin, the precision of the pass had already dropped drastically because of the fatigue. While all of this was happening, Jung-hwan was calmly watching the game from the sidelines, sipping a coffee, until Dongju's coach approached him and asked what he thought of Yu Jung's performance. Jung-hwan replied that he had been torn between him and Sungmin when it came to passing, perhaps because of the earlier mistake, thinking that a passing specialist had suddenly turned this into a game of stamina and ended up giving up. That was when the coach explained to Jung-hwan that, in reality, Yu Jung was a box-to-box midfielder, not a passing specialist. Jung-hwan was not expecting that. As he ran on the pitch, near exhaustion, Yu Jung thought to himself that he had even forgotten about this trait of his, because of his current position, but he remembered that in his past life, while they were drinking together, Hyun-min had told him he was a hell of a midfielder because of his stamina and fighting spirit. So, Yu Jung did what he did best: limitless pressure. Once again, he stuck like glue to Hyun-min's marking, and the math genius was already completely spent, complaining that Yu Jung was like a leech. The rival still tried to intercept the pass first, but lost his balance due to the fatigue in his legs and ended up making a horrible pass, which was intercepted by a Dongju player. He and Yu Jung dashed forward with everything toward the penalty area, making Hyun-min finally feel proud to see his friend pressing non-stop with that crazy stamina, which was Yu Jung's true maximum potential. When the ball came back to the boy, he realized they were already at the 88th minute of the game, and that this was his last chance to impress Coach Jung-hwan. It was very difficult to cross or pass to anyone from that angle, as he was surrounded on all sides and had no options. It was at that exact instant that suddenly he envisioned the golden zone right near the goal, inside the 6-yard box. He wondered how that was possible since Hyun-min was on the bench, but he didn't think twice, he just crossed it. He didn't even know who would show up there, until Do-gun threw himself into a diving header and scored, sealing the end of the game with Dongjil High School drawing the match. After watching that play, Jung-hwan stated that he had already decided who would be the central midfielder for the Under-17 World Cup. At the end of the day, Yu Jung was very thoughtful, reflecting on the fact that the golden domain had appeared in the game earlier, which meant it could manifest in other places even without Yoon-min's presence. At that moment, he was also analyzing some videos of Yoon-min, the absurd footage that got him called up to the U17 training, showing that his friend was spectacular and didn't even look like he belonged at the high school level anymore. Yu Jung concluded that, looking at the footage, it was very clear that the golden zone meant a goal-scoring chance. Do-gun was a resilient player who held his position instead of creating chances, making him less than ideal to exploit that space, whereas Hyun-min moved all the time to receive the ball free, making him the perfect fit for the golden zone. He noticed that, depending on the striker, even a great skill like his could be wasted, meaning it wasn't an all-powerful technique on its own. That was when Yeongan entered the locker room to talk to him. Later, at dinner time, Yu Jung was at home facing yet another of the culinary abominations concoctions his mother prepared, something that seemed to be alive on his poor father's spoon, who even asked if that was alchemy or something. She replied that it was just stewed fish, and the father noticed that Yu Jung looked a bit down. In fact, the boy was just lost in thought, and when his parents asked what had happened, he revealed that he had been called up to the U17 national team. His father gasped, asking if it was really the national team and if he was going to appear on TV. Yu Jung pondered that he might not even be a starter, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but his father got so excited about the idea of seeing his son on television that he started calling all his friends to share the news. Seeing that excitement, Yu Jung remembered that in his past life, his parents had suffered a lot when they found out he could no longer play. His mother commented that he had worked very hard and therefore deserved it, and in the face of that happy atmosphere, Yu Jung thought about how good it was to have decided to play football again, certain that everyone would live happily this time. The next morning, during physical training with Hyun Min, his friend found out about his decision to play in the U17 World Cup and rubbed it in his face that if it weren't for his advice, none of this would have happened. Yu Jung shot back, saying he got in because he was actually good, but Hyun Min insisted he could at least say thank you. Suddenly, a voice in the background shouted that there was no such thing as a thank you, and called the other a piece of crap, revealing a nasty argument between Dujong and Jongsu, who were almost coming to blows. Hyunmin commented that the powder keg had finally exploded, and since Yu Jung didn't understand at first, his friend asked if he had forgotten that there were two factions in their club. Yu Jung began to recover his memories from that time, and remembered that, on one side, there was the U17 World Cup group, with Hyunmin and Dujang, and on the other side were the anti-U17s, led by Park Jung-soo. Some people on the team, like Yu Jung himself, got along with both sides, but people like Jung-soo simply couldn't stand the U17 crew. Hyunmin commented that Jung-soo already disliked them, and Dujang kept provoking him, and Yu Jung agreed, thinking that Dujang remained just as stubborn as before. Suddenly, Yu Jung noticed a red glow in Jung-soo's eyes and gasped, thinking it might just be his imagination, or that perhaps another red domain existed besides the golden one. The coach interrupted the fight, asking what the kids thought they were doing, and Hyunmin warned them to get out of there before they got dragged into it too. They went back to running, and Yu Jung remained intrigued by that red glow, but Hyunmin brought him back to reality by reminding him that the under-17 national team training would start the next day. Yu Jung asked if he thought the national team would also have this stuff with factions and fighting, and Hyunmin, with a huge grin on his face, assured him that there would definitely be no factions, though Yu Jung could tell he was faking it, as he didn't sound convincing at all. The next day, at the U17 national team training, Jung Hwan introduced the new midfielder, Yu Jung, who was greeted with a deathly silence, with everyone staring at him as if he were an enemy. Yu Jung realized that there were indeed no factions, but rather strong discrimination in that place, which would be yet another challenge to overcome. On his first day, while trading a few passes to warm up, he kept thinking about that strange atmosphere, finding it impossible that Jung Hwang didn't know about it, even though the coach simply let it slide, something Yu Jung couldn't understand. That was when the player training with him commented that he had heard Yu Jung join the team in place of Oh Sung Min. This was Kim Min Sung, a right back, and just like Yu Jung, one of the candidates for the U17 World Cup. Min Sung commented that the other guy's stamina wasn't all that great, but admitted his passing was good. Yu Jung replied that his passes were indeed the real deal, and added that he would do his absolute best not to become a burden to the team. But suddenly he had to dodge quickly as a ball came flying straight at his face. Min Sung praised his good reflexes, but immediately laid down the truth, saying he had aimed at him on purpose because the team didn't need people who just ran around from behind, but rather those who were actually good. Yu Jung kept that to himself, and thought that now he understood why the coach acted that way. It was a clear message that he would need to prove his worth in there. Later, Young Han announced that the afternoon training would focus on tactics, and that the team would follow the plan laid out by the assistant coach. Meanwhile, Min Sung kept provoking Yu Jung. However, the boy knew very well who this fullback was. He remembered that, in the future, the guy would be the national team's fullback in the 2022 World Cup. A top-tier defender who, despite his small stature, possessed an absurd burst of speed, even though he had blundered a few times during that very same World Cup. Jung Hwan ordered everyone to warm up quickly because they would start in 5 minutes, but he called Yu Jung aside for a moment. The coach explained that in this training match, his role would be that of a free-roaming midfielder, a free role between the attack and defense, without a fixed position, which demanded creative passing, dribbling, finishing, and a lot of versatility. It was an extremely difficult task, but Yu Jung became fully motivated, thinking that in this case, he wouldn't need to hold back and could show his true capability. Yet, as soon as he entered the game, reality proved to be different. He could barely touch the ball, and simply couldn't even get close to it. He knew he was the rookie there, but that was already getting ridiculous. After all, if his teammates didn't pass him the ball, he would never be able to show his worth. In the midst of this, he kept getting constantly distracted on the pitch, looking almost as if he had ADHD or color blindness, until he was blindsided by another player who crashed hard into his shoulder. But instead of just ignoring him and walking away, that player apologized and helped him up. It was Moon Jung Won, a fullback and also a candidate for the U17 World Cup. up. Yu Jung replied that he was fine, and Jung Won, noticing the midfielder's distraction, explained that he couldn't break at the last second, apologizing again and wishing him well. When the game restarted, Yu Sheng thought that apparently not every national team player was a jerk. Hyeon Min also approached to ask if he was okay, and Yu Sheng told him to stop fussing because it was just a little pain. Hyeon Min clarified that he wasn't talking about the hit, but rather the fact that the guys really weren't passing the ball to him at all. He knew that if they saw Yu Sheng's passes, their jaws would drop, concluding that the group was just a bunch of jerks. Yu Sheng thought that receiving the ball would be the most practical way, and Hyeon Min even offered to go talk to the players, but Yu Sheng stopped him, guaranteeing that he would prove his worth in there with his own skill. If he didn't have teeth, he would bite with his gums. If the ball wouldn't come to him, he would go after it, taking advantage of the fact that the coach had placed him precisely as a free-roaming midfielder. The player in the blue vest who had possession of the ball mocked the situation, asking if he was the so-called free-roaming midfielder, and Yu Jung warned him that he was going to steal that ball. Of course, the opponent didn't make it easy. Exchanging passes with a teammate, they managed to execute a quick 1-2 and dribbled past Yu Jung with extreme ease and speed. The boy still ran to close down the space, but the other player passed backward and crossed into the box, ending in a shot from the striker that rattled the crossbar. Yu Jung wasn't even worried about the near goal, but rather about what had just happened to him. He was being humiliated. Everyone at that level had far better physical strength, speed, vision, passing, and decision-making than he did. It was a completely different level. He really began to question how he would be able to prove his worth. In the next play, he was already running like crazy toward everyone, trying to snap into tackles, but it was just too hard because the U-17 crew's passing rhythm was blindingly fast. Normally, the passing process happens in 3 steps. First you receive, second you look around, and third you execute the pass. But those guys simply skipped the second step. They just passed because they already knew exactly where every player was, maintaining an insane pace. With the skills he currently had, it was impossible for Yu Jung to keep up with that. Even so, he refused to stand still. He went to press the ball carrier once again, and the opponent asked if he ever got tired of lunging in blindly like that, saying he wouldn't achieve anything by persisting that way. The guy delivered a good pass, but Lee Jong-sok, who also played in midfield, managed to intercept the ball midway. He commented that there were things you could only conquer through pure persistence, and confessed that he liked the rookie's grit, while the blue vest team quickly prepared to drop back and lock down their defense. Jong-sok passed the ball to Yoo-jun, simply because he wanted to see what the kid was capable of on the pitch. Sensing the electricity of the moment, the young man finally got fired up and bolted down the flank like a bull. At that exact instant, a strange sensation washed over him, and, without fully understanding what was happening, he saw 3 different golden pillars rising from the grass. It was truly another level of play, but all those promising zones were too far away. He would need to think for a moment, or advance further before attempting a pass, but he had no time to plan anything because Min Sung suddenly crossed his path with impeccable marking. Yoo-jun found himself facing a dilemma, weighing whether to attempt a dribble or play it safe and pass the ball quickly, but the desire to prove his worth won out. Showing his boldness, he told Min Sung to get out of the way, calling him a loser, and heard back that the new kid seemed to prefer humiliating himself in public. Yoo-jun went for the dribble and managed to blow past his opponent easily at first, but his rival proved to be highly unpredictable and stuck to him again. Suddenly, the boy noticed a mysterious red light emanating from Min Sung's left leg, as if the limb were charging some kind of pure energy. The exact moment this energy fully charged, a visual arrow filled up and Min Sung's leg struck the ball firmly, stripping it completely from Yoo-jun's possession. Even though he was thrown off balance, the young man managed to recover both the ball and his footing, quickly deducing that the newly discovered red zone signified an imminent attack. Right after, Min Sung's right leg glowed with the same color, and a curved arrow indicated exactly where the ball would end up, announcing a dangerous sliding tackle. Using his sharp reflexes, Yoo-jun pulled the ball back at the very last millisecond, and returned the taunt, saying that, just as his rival had mentioned earlier, that move had been far too predictable. Without wasting time, he sent a long cross toward the last golden zone, the one furthest away of all, and the ball landed perfectly at his friend Hein Min's foot, who hammered it home with a beautiful first-time volley. The play was so spectacular that even the players on the blue team had to admit the rookie was incredibly good, while Jung Hwan watched from afar, thinking that the boy was holding his own remarkably well, even against national team-level athletes, which raised great expectations for the U-17 World Cup. As soon as the play ended, Min Sung walked up to Yoo-jun sporting that same red glow in his eyes, which made the young man mentally step back, remembering that the last time he saw that look, the situation had ended in a fight. To his surprise, the veteran merely extended his hand for a handshake, stating that he finally recognized him, since the rookie was the first to bypass his marking so easily, and that, from that moment on, they could get along. However, the truce revealed the defender's eccentric side immediately after. When he went to return the ball to restart the game, he purposely kicked it right into the face of a player on his own team. Yoo-jun noticed the malice instantly and heard Min Sung justify the act by saying he did it simply because he didn't recognize that guy yet, leading the protagonist to conclude that his teammate was a total psychopath. Perhaps due to that first first assist and the respect he earned. The second half of the scrimmage went much smoother for him, as he began to receive a decent number of passes, using the logic of the red zone to escape Min-sung's rough tackles, and finding yet another pinpoint assist through the golden zone. The boy saw his first training session with the national team come to an end. At the end of the day, already on the bus back with the delegation, Yoo-jun felt the weight of extreme fatigue. The pace of the training sessions was absurdly demanding for his reality, leaving his body barely able to move, even though everyone around him seemed completely normal. Hae-nim noticed his teammate's deplorable state and asked if he was wiped out, commenting that his face of exhaustion was obvious, but comforting him by saying that on the first day, everyone there had also been wrecked with pain. The veteran added that it was impressive for the rookie to be recognized for his football right on his debut, since it had taken him 2 whole days to show what he could do. Joking about the situation, Yoo-jun asked if that meant he was much better than his teammate, receiving a humorous curse telling him to go to hell in response. The young man thanked him for the backhanded compliment and settled into his seat to get some sleep, reflecting on the pride of being recognized for his talent, but knowing perfectly well that the major turning point had been the red zone. That power showed everything with precision, from the direction of the attack and which leg would be used to the exact timing of the opponent's action. He still didn't understand the reason behind the appearance of this phenomenon, but the logic seemed clear. If the golden zone meant a clear chance, the red one represented hostility or a threat, which made perfect sense since it had appeared during a defender's movements. Thinking about both colors, he wondered if he would be able to see other marks in the future, and questioned why he had returned to this life, knowing there were many mysteries to solve, but that he would handle each of them slowly, one at a time. The next morning, however, the pace imposed was anything but slow, and proved to be quite accelerated, as Sung-soo, the U17 fitness coach, pushed the physical exercises until Yoo-jun almost died of exhaustion. During the 10-minute break they were granted, the young man collapsed to the ground begging God for mercy, remembering that it had already been 3 weeks since his introduction to the national team. In this intense period, he had trained hard and built good friendships, cultivating a deep respect for specific athletes like Jung-sok, the talented midfielder who was already representing Korea and touted as a future German Bundesliga player. During the brief rest, Moon Jung-won approached and offered the protagonist a cup of water, jokingly demanding that on the next play he would have to pass the ball to return the favor. Yoo-jun accepted the sip of water, thinking about how unbelievable it was that this same guy, in his past life in the future, would become the all-time top scorer of the K-League. Soon, Min-sung and Hyun-min also joined the small group around the exhausted player, who ended up complaining and asking why everyone liked to swarm around him like bees to a hive. Hyun-min changed the subject and wanted to know if everyone had already packed their bags for the Sendai tournament, causing Yoo-jun to confirm that departure was the day after tomorrow. That competition was a youth football-friendly tournament held in the famous Sendai region of Japan, bringing together the national teams of Brazil, France, Japan, and Korea itself. In the protagonist's original timeline, Korea had been defeated by Brazil and France, managing to scrape only a narrow victory against the hosts. Even though he was aware that it was just a youth-friendly tournament, for Yoo-jun, this was the ultimate opportunity of his life, because his performance on the Japanese pitches would decide whether he would be kept or cut from the main U17 squad. Looking to the side, he remembered that he had seen with his own eyes Hyun-min turn into a global star in his previous existence, which fueled his determination to leave his own mark on the Sendai Cup, no matter what it took. 2 days later, the delegation landed in the city of Sendai, and several players showed great excitement about experiencing the first international trip of their lives. Taking advantage of some downtime, Yoo-jun mentioned that they had some free time, and wanted to know what his teammates planned to do during the break. Hyun-min replied promptly that he was going to analyze the economic trends of the Japanese candy market, leaving his friend intrigued as to why the guy took sweets so seriously. The truth was that this kid always had a lollipop in his mouth, or was sucking on some candy, a habit he kept even in the original timeline, and one that would surely earn him diabetes in the future. Preferring a more normal schedule, Yoo-jun decided to go along with Jung-suk's idea, who could only think about finding a good place to eat ramen. At the end of the Asian meal, Yoo-jun found himself in a tight spot and asked if his teammate could cover his bill first, confessing that he had left his wallet at the hotel. However, Jung-suk revealed that he was also completely broke. Faced with the absurdity of the situation, the young man could only laugh to himself, thinking that professional football players only didn't forget their own heads because they were firmly attached to their necks. In the midst of their despair over having absolutely no money to pay the bill, a true blessing fell from the sky in the form of a street challenge. A local football player, who was outside the establishment, announced loudly that if anyone could take the ball from him, he would pay 10 times the betted amount. Yoo-jun realized instantly that this was their chance to get out of trouble, and without hesitating, he and Jung-suk bet the only 200 yen they had in their pockets. A risky move, but a necessary one for the moment. Quickly, a small crowd gathered around to watch the impromptu spectacle, and the Japanese player laid out the rules, explaining that if they couldn't steal the ball within 30 seconds, the challenge would end, but he promised to give 1,000 yen to anyone who had bet 100. Jung-suk was completely lost, not understanding a single word since he didn't speak the local language, but the protagonist translated everything perfectly, leaving his teammate impressed by such fluency, a result of Yoojun's father working at a foreign trade company. Yoojun volunteered to go first, and as soon as his opponent gave the starting signal, he charged forward with everything he had, only to be caught off guard when he realized the ball hadn't even moved. The Japanese guy revealed with a tense smile that he was just playing around in that first instant, leaving the young man a bit embarrassed, but determined to take the initiative for real on the next attempt. When the timer actually started running, the protagonist ended up being dribbled with extreme ease. He even noticed that his opponent seemed to lose his balance on the left side at one point, but it was all just a trick, as the player masterfully stepped on the ball and flicked it to his back foot. Yoojun still tried to regain control from behind, but time ran out and the 30 seconds passed, prompting the Japanese player to praise the good attempt while the boy apologized to Jung-suk for the failure. The talented midfielder calmed his friend down, saying he had just been observing their rival's style and thought he would be able to disarm him when it was his turn. As soon as the timer was started again, the Japanese player noticed that Jung-suk remained static, merely tracking his every move with his large, attentive eyes, which brought a strange sensation to the man on the ball. It was as if the street match had reversed roles, and the Japanese player was now the one being hunted, feeling trapped like a fly in a spider's web. Finding that stance interesting, the opponent decided to test who the real predator was, and began making rapid foot movements, displaying a level of dribbling that was far from that of a mere street amateur. Despite his rival's skill, Jung-suk remained motionless, simply studying the pattern, which forced the Japanese player to risk a bolder move to make him break his stance. The opponent tried an agile feint behind the midfielder, but the Korean player intercepted the play with surgical precision, easily controlling the ball with his back leg. Yoojun cheered instantly, praising his teammate and saying he knew he could count on him to save their skins. True to his word, the Japanese player approached with the 1,000-yen bill and praised the kid's good eye, while Jung-suk relievedly did the math, commenting that since each bowl cost 500 yen, their lunch was properly covered. Yoojun greeted the guy and thanked him for the opportunity, acting as the spokesperson since his friend didn't speak the language, and heard the opponent wish them an enjoyable rest of their trip. As the sun was already setting on the horizon, a friend of that mysterious player came running up, warning that the coach was looking for him everywhere like crazy. The street player jokingly asked if his friend had witnessed his defeat, and received the reply that losing there was no shame at all, especially since he was wearing weighted ankle straps that limited his actual speed. What the Koreans had no idea about was that this talented kid was none other than the midfielder Satoran, one of the top candidates for Japan's U17 national team. Finally, the day of the long-awaited opening of the Sendai Cup arrived, which would begin with the clash between Brazil and Korea. Yoojun focused, remembering that in the original timeline, his country had lost 3-1, but now history would be rewritten with the help of his golden zone. To his absolute shock, however, when the match was about to begin, he found himself relegated to the bench, having been left out of the starting lineup against the Brazilians. An hour before the opening whistle, while still in the athletes' preparation room, the atmosphere was relaxed, and Moon Jung-won had even offered a sweet to the protagonist, asking for his love, but received a grumpy response from the young man, who complained about him begging for passes all the time. The striker pleaded to receive a clean ball to finish at least once, but Yoojun clipped his wings right then and there, stating that with such a horrific shooting accuracy, there was no way he would pass to him. It was at that moment that Coach Jun-kwon entered the room to announce the official lineup, and, noticing his friend's absence, Hyunmin immediately questioned why the protagonist was not among the starting 11. The coach merely replied harshly that the boy had been excluded from the starting lineup specifically for that match, leaving Yoojun frustrated and wondering if he hadn't trained well enough, even though he knew he had given his absolute best in every single session. However, while trying to make sense of the decision, the young man noticed a mysterious golden glimmer flashing in Jun-kwon's eyes, a phenomenon he didn't immediately understand. Later, while settled on the bench watching the game, he reflected on the meaning of that color, remembering that the golden light always represented an opportunity, or a chance. This meant the commander intended to put him on the pitch at some point, but only if a specific condition was met. The clock was already ticking past the 25-minute mark of the second half, and nothing was happening, until the deadlock was finally broken, with a goal from Brazil, scored by their number 9 striker Dudu Barbosa. After conceding the goal, Korea regained possession in midfield. Considering that Brazil was the heavy favorite to lift the trophy at this U17 Cup, conceding only one goal meant the defense was holding up well under pressure. The deficit was just one goal, and it was still way too early for the Korean team to throw in the towel. Go Min-chan tried to spark a counterattack and surged forward at pace, passing the ball toward Jung-suk, but the Brazilian marking was relentless and managed to break up the play. The interception was executed by Ezequiel Vitória Dadi, Brazil's talented midfielder, who quickly fed his teammate Dudu Barbosa, leaving the top scorer poised to find the back of the net once again. From the bench, Yoojun watched it all, blown away by the opponent's absurd speed, noting that the transition time between their passes was incredibly short. Korea's rhythm was good, but Brazil's was visibly superior. Facing imminent danger, the young man mentally rooted for Jung-suk to read the play in time, hoping his friend would do exactly what he had demonstrated during the street challenge. Jung-suk had an uncanny ability to read his opponents through pure observation, utilizing every tiny piece of data he gathered during the match. Thinking about this, Yoo-jun, who was still on the bench, realized he could try to do the same. He sought to learn the method, trying to concentrate as hard as possible to mimic his teammate, but he soon noticed that he didn't look like a very threatening spider in that mental web. The truth was, he wasn't understanding a single thing from pure tactical reading. Concluding that it was much better to focus on what he actually knew how to do, he remembered his ultimate weapon, the golden zone. That visual indicator showed him in advance exactly where a goal could come from, and by leveraging that advantage, he would be able to stay one step ahead of everyone on the pitch. The young man even questioned whether the Brazilians could see it too, or if the fact that they always moved to the perfect spot to receive the ball was just the result of all their experience and hard work. The protagonist snapped back to reality and admitted that if he had stepped onto the pitch in that frantic rhythm from the very beginning, he wouldn't have been able to do anything, even feeling a sense of relief for having started on the bench and thinking that coach Jun Kwon might have foreseen this scenario by leaving him out. But right at that moment of reflection, Dudu scored another goal for the rivals. Once again, the lethal number 8 and 9 duo worked to perfection, resulting in an assist and a ball in the back of the net. The number 8, Ezequiel, passed like a flash behind Dudu, and the number 9 just cushioned the ball back to him without even needing to look, immediately triggering a smooth and engaging passing play in the purest tiki-taka style. Yoo-jun realized instantly that those two guys were the true heartbeat of the Brazilian attack. That was when Commander Junkwon broke the tension on the bench and told the boy to get ready, announcing that he was making a substitution and that he was going into the game. The situation was so critical that the Korean narrator in the broadcast booth was practically giving up, commenting that it wasn't even fun to keep narrating such a blowout. But the color commentator beside him still held on to a thread of hope, and soon received word of the change. It would be the young midfielder's debut in an international tournament, coming on to replace Min-chan. As he stepped onto the grass, Hyun-min immediately greeted him with some banter, saying the slacker had arrived late, but Yoo-jun shot back instantly, stating that when you arrive late, that's when you have to run twice as hard, warning his teammates that he was going to run like a madman, and they had better try to keep up. With the scoreboard reading 2-0, Hyun-min felt the weight of not having managed to create any real opportunities so far, seeing that the level of Brazilian football was completely different from theirs. He did his best to motivate the rest of the squad, whose morale was entirely in the gutter, but Yoo-jun's mere entrance was enough for the guys to finally liven up. In the very first play, Moon Jung-won dragged the marking away, plowing through everyone like an angry bull, and passed to Jung-suk, who almost got shut down by the defenders but lived up to his reputation as a great observer, and slipped a quick pass toward the protagonist. On the broadcast, the commentator repeated that this was the number 17's debut in international tournaments, and the narrator added that they didn't have much information on the athlete, but were anxious to see what he would show. Even the star striker Dudu noticed from the other side that the mood of the game had shifted drastically with the rookie's entrance, concluding that this was no ordinary substitution, and that they would soon find out why. Shortly after, Korea misplaced a pass in the attacking half, and Dudu himself controlled the ball to launch a deadly counterattack. Except Yoo-jun was already hot on his heels, sprinting at maximum speed. Adopting his best box-to-box style, the protagonist thought to himself that the defense at that moment came down to him and just two men left at the back. Looking ahead, he saw Ezequiel and Vandrick running toward him to offer a passing option, which meant he would need to cut that ball out before Brazil invaded the penalty box. The young man yelled out, asking for help from Ming-sung, who was sprinting down the flank to corner the opposing striker. This made Dudu scoff out loud, asking if they really thought just two of them could stop him. Yoo-jun told his rival to stop speaking Portuguese to him and locked his focus on the play. Min-sung was the first to dive in for the tackle, but ended up getting completely turned inside out by a demoralizing flick over his head. The protagonist saw the move and tried to anticipate his run to pick up the loose ball, but the Brazilian number 9 was sharper, pulling off a spectacular double lob and taunting the number 17 by telling him he was nothing special. Even after being humiliated by the dribble, the two Koreans kept chasing the forward. He smiled, thinking he was doing his job perfectly, wasting the opponent's time and drawing all the attention to himself while his team organized. Brazil then initiated a much more intense pressing game, and their tiki-taka proved incredible, executing a quick triangular passing sequence to completely baffle Min-sung and Yoo-jun. In the booth, the commentator warned that the Brazilians were already fully in position, and questioned where Ezequiel would send the ball. The Brazilian midfielder thought that the moment that triangle closed, the play became lethal, as their short passing trio was too fast and practically impossible to stop without an exact prediction. If the opponent tried to intercept, they would simply pass the ball back to the midfield, making it look like the ball vanished right before their rivals' eyes. It was their signature play, dubbed the Bermuda Triangle. As expected, the final recipient of the pass was the top scorer Dudu, who prepared to put on his show in the box. However, he was caught off guard by a surgical slide tackle from Yoo-jun, who intercepted the ball flawlessly. The protagonist had already deciphered the triangle because he had seen that exact same play in his past life, in the original timeline, and also while watching intently from the bench. The final pass would always be directed to the number 9. Using that same power of observation he had learned from Yongsuk, he diffused the danger center and passed the ball straight to Hyunmin, who was dropped a bit further back, screaming at the top of his lungs for his friend to run. The Korean winger bolted toward the opponent's goal, capitalizing on the completely wide-open Brazilian defense, since all their players had pushed up to support Dudu's play. It was finally Korea's counterattack, with Hyunmin running free toward Brazil's empty box to face the goalkeeper one-on-one. He unleashed a rocket, but the Brazilian shot stopper made a spectacular save. That goalkeeper, in fact, looked to be at least 40 years old, making Yoojin mentally question if the tournament wasn't supposed to be an under-17 category. On the rebound, winger Min Suk-jung recovered possession, but froze, completely unsure of what to do with the ball as the Brazilian defense quickly tracked back. Seeing his teammates' hesitation, the protagonist surged forward at maximum speed, called for the pass, and, without controlling it, crossed it directly into the middle of the box, exactly where the golden zone was glowing. He didn't know who would finish the play, but he was certain someone would push it into the back of the net to score Korea's first goal. To his joy, it was Hyunmin who anticipated the marker and met that beautiful pass. The veteran keeper still fully extended his arm to try and make the save, but the ball slipped through his fingers and barely rolled over the line. The Brazilian side of the stadium went completely silent, while the Korean narrators and commentators in the booth could barely believe their eyes. The strongest national team in the world was undoubtedly Brazil, the undisputed #1 in youth football. But the South Korean Hyunmin ignored all the favoritism and scored a stunning goal to narrow the deficit. The narrator screamed that the forward's movement had been incredible, and the commentator added that the credit for the goal belonged almost entirely to Yoo-jun, since that pass had been pinpoint accurate, concluding that this newly formed duo was extremely promising for the country's future. From the opposite bench, Coach Getulio, commander of the Brazil U17 team, furrowed his brow in annoyance. He thought they couldn't let those two boys ruin a game that was already won, and decided in their hands, concluding that it seemed like the right time to sub Gonçalves into the match. After the scare and the tactical adjustments, the match continued to unfold, but now in a much slower, gridlocked manner in midfield. The Brazilian players were intentionally wasting time, completely shameless about it, trying to win by running down the clock with only 10 minutes left in the game. But Yoojin thought he wouldn't let that happen, and went to press until the very last second. Even with the opponent's rapid passes, Yoojin stayed glued to them, annoying them and forcing them to move the ball. Dudu was also dissatisfied because he didn't want to win with such a cowardly strategy. Besides, he thought about how Yoojin had gone in hard on him earlier, and he hadn't gotten his revenge yet. Suddenly, Yoojin managed to steal the ball, proving that his stamina was indeed his greatest strength. The Brazilian defenders rushed back toward their goal in desperation, while Ezequiel screamed for them to close in on him, and the defense tried to do its job. However, Yoojin predicted both defensive movements perfectly thanks to the red zone, with arrows indicating where his opponent's hostile feet would go. Yoojin delivered another pass to the golden pillar, but the ball didn't go all the way in. That was when Mun, at the very last moment, struck it with everything he had. Yoojin already knew the goalkeeper would save it, so he needed to do something by predicting the rebound. He remembered Jung-sok and how he used to act, observing the speed of the ball, the position of the surrounding markers, the angle of the defense, the goalkeeper, and the spin on the ball. Taking all of this into account, he ran straight to where the ball would drop at the 84th minute of the match. There was only one option for him, since he wouldn't be able to reach the ball normally, so he went for a bicycle kick and tried to score the goal himself. Everyone watched in agony, and against all odds, he pulled off the unbelievable. Yoojun had just scored the equalizer against Brazil. In the original timeline, he had been a failed player, but now he had just scored a goal right on his debut, and against Brazil, the strongest national team in the world. Mun approached him, asking since when he had learned to shoot like that, and Minsu commented that it was complete madness. Meanwhile, Yoojun thought that they only needed one more goal to beat the best in the world. On the other side, the Brazilian defense wondered what the hell that was, and since when Korea was so strong. Dudu called everyone out, saying that this was an embarrassment. They were Brazil, football ran through their veins, and they were not going to lose. After all, their style of play had never been about cooking the game, so as long as the ball was rolling, they wouldn't stop. The team got fired up by the speech, because that was the real Brazilian national team. At that moment, with only 5 minutes left on the clock, Brazil pushed forward once again. It was an electrifying battle where nobody yielded an inch, and neither side let up on their marking. Yoojun was running neck and neck with Dudu, but one of the Brazilian players managed to steal the ball and passed it straight to Ezequiel. Yoojun knew he had to block him at all costs, otherwise, they would execute that triangle play again. Minsung tried to step in to block the path, but they successfully ran their triangle strategy anyway, and Dudu surged into the attack. Dudu noticed that the space ahead of the other forward was completely wide open. If he slotted the ball through there, it would be a massive goal-scoring opportunity, but Yoojun threw himself into the passing lane. Dudu knew that the right move there was to ignore his rival and pass to Vendrick, but he desperately wanted revenge for that earlier slide tackle. He couldn't stomach being defeated, and wanted to completely run over Yoojun. Yoojun knew stopping the play would be incredibly difficult, but he observed every single movement. At first he thought Dudu would cut to the right, but Dudu's center of gravity dropped, revealing it was a body feint. Yoojun managed to block it anyway, and to top it it off, nutmeg Dudu beautifully. The Brazilian players tried to close in to recover the ball, but Yujin broke through their tackles and bolted forward for South Korea's final chance to turn the game around. Going all out, Dudu screamed in desperation for someone to mark him. Yujin started facing heavy pressure, and the golden zone didn't even appear. One of the Brazilians got right in front of him, saying there was a limit to how cocky he could be. Yujin was completely surrounded, with a defender on his right, one behind him, and one in front, but he tried to withstand the physical pressure by following the red zones. One of the Brazilian defenders even thought that the guy's dribbling style looked totally awkward, yet he was somehow getting past everyone anyway, as if Yujin already knew exactly where their feet were going to go. When he spotted the golden pillar, there was no time to think. He just shot in that direction, and Young-suk brought the ball under control. Young-suk invaded the Brazilian defense and struck it home for the comeback goal in the 90th minute. The game ended right after that goal, finishing 3-2 for Korea, and defeating the most powerful national team in the world. Yujin found himself wondering if they had truly beaten Brazil, wrapping up the match with 2 assists and 1 goal, an absurd record for a debut game. This was just the beginning for him. His true life as a football player was starting now. Jung Kwon thought to himself that 20 minutes was all Korea needed to overturn a 2-0 deficit and walk away with a victory against Brazil. The star of the show was undoubtedly Yujin in his first official match, performance so incredible it practically warranted an investigation. Later, at the Korean national team's quarters, everyone was celebrating with a feast. The guys were stuffing their faces with fried chicken, but for some reason, Hyun-min was stuffing his face with lollipops instead. Get a load of this guy. He only eats sweets and looks practically diabetic. It's unreal. Jong Kwon told everyone to calm down for God's sake, but noticed that Yujin wasn't there. He asked Mun why he hadn't called him, since the two were roommates. Mun replied that Yujin said he was exhausted and preferred to go to sleep. In reality, back in that room, Yujin was trying to sleep but couldn't catch a wink. It couldn't have been any different. Even though it was just a friendly, it was his first official match, and the adrenaline simply wouldn't fade. A lot had happened right after the final whistle. The first episode of this whirlwind occurred as soon as the match ended. While they were heading back to the dressing room, a reporter from KBC Sports named Jong-suf suddenly popped up, asking for a quick minute for an interview. Yujin accepted. Since it was the very first interview of his life, he was so nervous at the time that afterward, he couldn't even properly remember what he had said. The second post-game episode was a total shock. Dudu, scraping together some broken English, asked Yujin to swap jerseys with him. Yujin froze from nervousness, so much so that Dudu actually asked if he didn't want to swap. Yujin quickly managed to reply that of course he would swap, that it was no problem at all. He just genuinely hadn't expected the biggest star in Brazil to want his shirt. The good thing was that Dudu knew how to speak a little English, and that made Yujin feel like he had a better shot at getting closer to the guy. And in fact, the two ended up forming a pretty cool connection right there. As for the third and final episode, it went down when the coach approached Yujin alongside Kim Soo-chol, the president of the national team strategy committee. Basically, the guy came in with some talk about wanting Yujin to go study in Spain. All Yujin had to do in exchange was mention later on that he had been sponsored by the association. Just that, simple as that. On the surface, it looked like a great deal, but Yujin found it highly suspicious that Soo-chol showed up to pitch this right after the final whistle. It was definitely an impulse decision, an attempt to buy his rights on the cheap after such an impressive debut. If it were a direct spot on a professional Spanish team, that would be one thing, but just to study abroad? No way. So he told the committee president that he needed to have a serious talk with his parents before making any decisions. All of this happened within a mere 3-hour window after the game, leaving Yujin completely drained, both physically and mentally. He just wanted to rest, but right at that moment, the coach knocked on the bedroom door, and he had to answer it. The coach asked if he was resting, and said he could come back another time if Yujin wanted, but Yujin replied no sir, apologized, and welcomed him in, asking if there was anything he could do for the boss. The coach said it wasn't an urgent matter, but asked if Yujin had already thought about turning professional for good, questioning whether he would go straight to the pros or enroll in a high school team first. Yujin thought to himself that it wasn't like he had never considered high school, but that would delay his breakthrough as a player far too much. He had already decided that in this life, he was going to risk everything and go straight to the pros. Jungwon asked if he had received any offers yet, adding that if he hadn't, he could personally lend a hand. Yujin was shocked to see the coach personally offering to help him turn pro. After all, with the heavyweight career the coach possessed, he could definitely open doors. However, Yujin remembered that in this timeline, the year was still 2009, well before Korean players started moving abroad en masse. So, the coach was probably talking about recommending him to the K-League's first division, but Yujin wanted to play at a much higher level than that. He asked Jungwon if he was referring to the domestic league, but the coach laughed and replied, "Of course not, kid. I'm talking about abroad." The commander then asked if he had ever heard of the Super League, the Turkish league, explaining that there was a club there where he himself had played during his days as an active athlete. Yujin knew the Turkish league very well, the exact same league where South Korea's greatest defender in history once played, which meant it was a path that already had a successful precedent. Even so, just by looking at his face, the coach noticed his dejection and commented that it seemed like he hadn't shown much interest interest. Yu Jung tried to play it down, saying that wasn't exactly the case, and Yoonggwan chimed in, saying it was fine for him to aim higher, mentioning that he had also played in the J-League. Yu Jung replied that, since it was a recommendation coming from the coach himself, he would consider it with great care, but Yoonggwan smiled, knowing that was just a polite way of saying no. After all, if the kid had rejected the Turkish league, he wouldn't settle for the Japanese one. The coach reasoned that from then on, he would receive countless proposals like that one, and needed to learn how to make the right decision for each of them. Yu Jung agreed internally, knowing just how difficult that would be. That was when the coach said he was right, that he was still very young, inexperienced, and didn't really know the world yet. He explained that even though he couldn't connect him directly to a major European league right now, he could introduce him to someone who would help him make the right decisions. If Yu Jung was down for it, he would introduce him to a professional sports agent. Yu Jung knew that having an agent was a massive step for a player, as they are the professional who handles all business and contracts, from major negotiations with clubs down to the smallest details of professional life. Since it was a position of utmost trust, you couldn't just hire anyone, but Coach Jungwon was offering someone he fully trusted. Yu Jung accepted on the spot. After all, there was no way to turn down such a recommendation coming from his own coach. Youngwon joked, asking if he was going to reject this one too, since he had turned down every league he proposed, and Yu Jung ended up awkwardly apologizing. Laughing at the situation, the coach handed over agent Kim Ji-ho's business card and let him know he would make the official introductions as soon as they returned to Korea, right after competing in the Sendai Cup. Yu Jung thanked him deeply for the opportunity, feeling that his first steps into professional football were finally aligning. The coach said goodbye, telling Yu Jung to get some good rest, but right at that moment, Moon burst through the door, slamming the coach against the wall. Poor Youngwon didn't let it slide, and smacked Moon right on the head. Moments later, Moon was cowering, apologizing, and asking what the boss was doing in their room. Yu Jung faked an excuse, saying it was a surprise inspection, making Moon lament, thinking the coach now held an eternal grudge against him. To calm his friend down, Yu Jung told him not to worry, and to just pass him the ball so he could score some points the next day. Moon loved the idea, saying he was counting on him, but to make up for the scare, he immediately stole his partner's snack and stuffed it all into his mouth. Yu Jung complained that the snack was his, telling him to share, creating a light-hearted atmosphere before the storm. On the day of the match against France, the commentator went on air much more animated, reflecting everyone's confidence after the historic victory against Brazil. France came with their traditional and consistent hexagonal football tactics, a clinical team that doesn't make mistakes and doesn't waste chances. However, South Korea entered with a completely different formation from the last match, betting on fast wingers with good acceleration to try and break the French team's tight midfield through the flanks. When both national teams stepped onto the pitch, it was clear that the stadium was much more crowded. Beating Brazil had made an impact, and now there was a crowd cheering for the Koreans, along with several reporters and a broadcasting crew positioned in a much better spot. Korea had gained massive spotlight, which was great for Yu Jung, as it would be the perfect chance to show exactly what kind of player he was. As soon as the match started, Kevin, France's left winger, and Anthony, the midfielder, advanced, playing that super consistent French 1-2 pass. However, Yu Jung was actually shocked because he found the French players way too slow. He easily stole the ball in a full sprint and bolted straight toward the opponent's half. On his way, he noticed two golden pillars appearing, one in the penalty box and another in the 6-yard box. The closest teammates were Hyunmin and Moon. Thinking the larger zone should belong to Hyunmin, he decided to pass to Moon this time. Moon charged forward, motivated like a bull, and fired a shot straight at the goal. But in reality, Yu Jung noticed at the last second that the one who actually pushed it in and scored the goal was Hyunmin, not Moon. Moon appeared right behind him, absolutely furious, complaining that he was definitely in a much better position. That was when Yu Jung realized a detail he had forgotten. The larger area actually belonged to Moon because he is a world-class winger produced by Korea. The only reason he was still playing in the K-League, despite his absurd talent, was his terrible habit of sabotaging the match whenever he threw a tantrum. Grumbling that Yu Jung never intended to pass the ball to him and that he felt like quitting the game, Moon started causing trouble. The worst part was that the biggest conflict of that match wasn't the French opponents but Korea's own team. Even so, Korea remained dominant, and France seemed to be losing control. While marking one of them to win the ball back, Yu Jung noticed that the French players' movements were stiff. They seemed very nervous. Looking around, he realized the reason. It was the cameras, the flashes, and the reporters. Those boys deep down were only 17 years old. Yu Jung had a much older mindset because of his original timeline, but his rivals were just kids dealing with media and crowd pressure that was entirely new to them. To make matters worse, they had started the game trailing behind against an underdog like South Korea, so their morale was low, and they lacked the mental fortitude to handle the pressure. Suddenly, Yu Jung saw two golden zones again, a larger one and a small one, with Moon running like a bull once more. Nervous and unsure where to pass, he thought this time it had to be into the 6-yard box. But when he made the pass, Jungwoo was the one who attempted the shot, and the French goalkeeper ended up saving it. Jungwoo apologized for the mistake, promising to get it right next time, but Moon immediately glued himself to Yu Jung, Yujun, repeating like a broken record that he hadn't passed the ball to him again. From then on, that idiot Moon started ruining the game on purpose, his performance plummeting right in the middle of the French marking. He was truly sabotaging his own team. Exploiting the opening left by that idiot, the French managed to advance all the way to the 6-yard box. The Korean defenders couldn't predict the solid French 1-2, and their striker found the back of the net, tying the game at 1-1. Yujun realized that France's movements were completely different from the beginning. They were getting used to the pressure, and the game was about to get much harder. With the equalizer, the first half came to an end. On the bench, Yujun was thinking about the disaster he was facing with Moon sabotaging the match. He even considered asking the coach to sub him out, but he knew that wouldn't work. In the original timeline, no one discovered Moon's childish habit of throwing games for another 3 years. Until then, everyone just thought he was an inconsistent player. If Yujun asked for a substitution now, they would think he was losing his mind. On the other hand, if he kept ignoring the guy, Moon would keep throwing the match, and Chad would continue to advance freely down his flank. It was the ultimate duo of chaos, and that would open up the perfect space for the French striker to turn the game around. There was no other way. In the second half, he would have to find a way to make that idiot score a goal. When the second half began, Yujun was in possession of the ball. The idea was to play first, to slowly build up an advantage over Moon. But the French team had already noticed that the ball went through Yujun a lot, and that he found the best passes. Because of this, they started marking him much more aggressively. The French players were motivated, and after the equalizer, they had gained a lot more confidence, bringing true European solidity to the pitch. The fullback, Chad, besides closing down the defense, was hyping up the whole team. In a quick play, Kevin received the ball with a lot of freedom on the left wing, while Chad was already advancing to receive it further ahead. He infiltrated, caught the ball near the box, and crossed it straight into the middle. Pierre struck it hard toward the net, but the Korean goalkeeper pulled off a miracle and made the save. This goalkeeper, by the way, was a character who barely ever appeared, making one almost curious to know more about him. But the script didn't give the poor guy any attention, which made sense, since the goalkeeper had no direct involvement with Yujun, who played in midfield and interacted more with the center backs. The Korean commentator began to shout that France's performance was completely different now, pounding Korea's goal relentlessly. The Koreans' morale was plummeting, and physical exhaustion was hitting hard. Crushed by the pressure, they were losing confidence by the minute. Yujun knew the clock was ticking against them, and his only way out was to find a way to serve a goal on a silver platter, making it completely effortless for Moon to finish. Jeon-suk appeared out of nowhere, asking if he was trying to make Moon score at all costs. Yujun already knew he would notice. After all, when Moon was throwing a tantrum, he would ruin the game, and you could clearly see it through his speed, his stride, and his very posture. It was blindingly obvious. To stop fullback Chad's overlapping runs, there was only one way: let Moon score a goal so he would finally wake up for the match. Once again, Jeon-suk impressed Yujun with his absurd capacity for observation, since the guy could analyze the movements of both his teammates and opponents at the same time. With that help, Yujun thought he might actually manage to get Moon out of his slump. He rushed to regain possession of the ball, remembering that the golden zone showed exactly where the goal would come from, though it didn't reveal which player would make the final shot. But if there were a way to predict that, right at that moment, to win the ball while marking, he used Jeon-suk's observation method. The French player lowered his center of gravity, indicating he would try a dribble, and Yujun analyzed everything, from his breathing to his next move, making a well-timed tackle from the right, and stealing the ball. He began to observe the flow of the athletes, predicted the tactical movements, and realized he could apply this to his own teammates. He saw the fullbacks closing in, figured out how the marking would react, and noticed that the best chances were for Jungyu. His partner moved exactly as Yujun was predicting, but the long pass ended up coming out too strong, resulting in a throw-in for the French team. Yujun realized he still couldn't read everything perfectly, but he was getting the hang of it and still had time to adjust. The throw-in went straight to Chad, but Jeon-suk closed in, marking hard, forcing his rival to pass to Kevin instantly. Now it was one-on-one, and Kevin cut inside sharply, passing the ball back to the French attack. However, Min-sung anticipated it and intercepted the ball, complaining that the guys up front were marking way too loosely, and crossed it to the left. The Korean fullback managed to control it at the last second, and Yujun, who was playing box-to-box and running all over the pitch, got the ball again. He saw 3 zones ahead of him, 2 small ones and 1 much larger, and kept concentrated, reading the flow of the game. Hyungnim was open, and there were 2 other zones similar in size and position, so Moon's zone had to be one of those. He read the flow of the movements and believed with everything he had that the right zone was Moon's, and the idiot, despite being a complete moron, luckily ran in that direction. Flashbacks to a situation at the Korean U-17 training center came to mind, where Hyungnim had passed to a completely open Moon to score on a perfect counterattack, but his ball control was trash, and he ended up blasting it out for a throw-in. At that moment, Yujin thought it was better to stop crossing the ball in the air to Moon because his first touch was horrible. Back in the present, knowing the ball needed to be perfectly measured into Moon's golden zone, he shouted to his teammate, teammate, who despite being a total pain in the ass, decided to shoot first time. The ball looked like it was going wide of the post, but it curved incredibly and went in, sealing Moon's first goal in the Sendai Cup. Moon realized he had scored his goal and celebrated wildly, securing the 2-1 comeback goal for Korea against France. Yoojun was more exhausted than anyone else from exerting so much mental effort, and Moon even went over to thank him, saying that thanks to him he managed to score, praising his friend's effort. However, Yoojun thought that if Moon weren't such an idiot, he wouldn't have had to exhaust himself so much. The second half continued with pressure piling on France, since Korea was now in the lead. Chad recovered the ball and wasn't even worried about the 2-1 scoreline, thinking that if they did one more overlap they could equalize. But Moon charged past like a bull, body-checking Chad, and when the French fullback tried to shove him back, he got the worst of it. Before, Moon was playing like a fool, but now he was marking hard and shutting down Chad, who couldn't get past him anymore no matter what. Finally, the second half ended, and Korea won the match 2-1. Yoojun celebrated the fact that they had beaten Brazil first and then France, knowing that only one game stood between them and the Sendai Cup trophy. Later, as he left the stadium, the physical and mental exhaustion was overwhelming, but the stress wasn't over yet. A horde of reporters and paparazzi were there, snapping photos and begging for interviews. Yoojun felt a bit nervous, but excited at the same time, unsure of who to talk to, until he spotted the very journalist who, in his original timeline, would become the CEO of KBC, the same man who had conducted his first interview back then. He went straight to the reporter upon recognizing him. Knowing the boy was busy and in a hurry, the journalist asked only a few questions, centering on whether he expected to win the next match against Japan. Yoojun recalled that even in the original timeline, without his presence, Korea had already beaten Japan. Now that they had taken down Brazil and France, he was absolutely certain of victory. That was his confident answer. At night, back in the dorms, he stayed glued to his laptop, recalling everything, especially the Japanese players and their past formation. Even when he had received that terrible diagnosis about his eye disease, along with color blindness and progressive vision loss, he still hadn't been able to quit the sport. He used to study every game and watch Hyun Min while rooting for him. However, something was very strange. The lineup the coach handed out featured a completely different player from the one he knew in the past, a guy named Sato Ren, a name he felt he had heard somewhere before. Meanwhile, on the streets of Japan, this Sato Ren was completely schooling some poor soul with the ball, as the kid was actually the #1 freestyle football player. At the same time, at the Japanese U17 training center, Shinji, the team's midfielder, was one of the most hyped about the tournament, all under the watchful eyes of the staff. Assistant coach Takagi Hideto and head coach Ito Masaki. Hide commented excitedly that Shinji carried the weight and title of being one of the biggest prospects in current Japanese football, and expectations were only soaring since the grand event would take place the very next day, the highly anticipated Sendai Cup final. The clash would be against the powerful South Korean national team, which had already left giants like Brazil and France behind, promising an extremely difficult and tense match. Since it was a game that naturally drew everyone's attention, reporters and the media would pack the stands and broadcasting booths. With this in mind, Masaaki pointed out that any player who managed to shine on that pitch would have the chance to become a major star overnight. Hearing this, Hideto suggested they should deploy their usual lineup, keeping the strategy revolving entirely around Shinji's talent. But Masa countered, saying that this was actually a golden opportunity to test something new. Hideto questioned if it wasn't too early to put so much responsibility on the kid's shoulders, but his partner firmly replied no, guaranteeing it was the perfect moment to showcase that bold tactic to the entire world, a new formation that had everything to become Japan's ultimate weapon. Dubbed the Black Hole. Right after the Japanese practice ended, Asahi Leon, who played as a right winger for the U17 team, looked at his teammate and asked if Shinji ever got tired, reminding him that the important match was only the next day. But the star player arrogantly replied that he had to push himself to the absolute limit to evolve, as that was how he helped the team. Secretly, he thought to himself that the real reason he trained so much was to avoid having to play with a piece of trash like Asahi. Once he turned professional, mentally cursing his teammate as a lazy piece of shit. It was then that Asahi noticed that the official lineup list had just been released. Shinji opened the paper with absolute certainty that, once again, the tactics would be built entirely around him. After all, he didn't consider himself equal to those other losers on the team, and knew he would shine in that match, becoming a true star and the main protagonist of the night. However, as his eyes skimmed through the names, he was shocked to find that he simply wasn't listed among the starters. Inconsolable and furious, he stormed straight into the manager's office demanding answers, asking if there had been some mistake on the list. But inside, alongside the coaching staff, was Sato Ren. Hideto immediately apologized for the misunderstanding and admitted they should have informed him about the change beforehand, explaining that specifically for this match against the Koreans, Ren would start in his place. Shinji snapped back angrily, reminding them that up until that point, he had always been the absolute focal point of the team. Sensing the heavy tension, Sato Ren calmly stepped up to greet him, trying to ease the situation by saying he had no intention of stealing anyone's spotlight. Completely blinded by rage, Shinji just shoved his teammate side and slammed the office door, storming out fuming. His perfect plan had been to beat Korea, blow up in the mainstream media, and get famous enough to secure a contract with a top-tier professional club. But everything had been ruined by that freestyle clown. To him, the manager was losing his mind, because that new guy wasn't better than him in any way. In that moment of pure hatred, Shinji vented his frustration by spitting on someone else's locker in the dressing room, but he had to quickly hide inside an empty locker when he heard approaching footsteps. It was none other than Sato and Nagai walking in. Sato mentioned to his friend that he was going to practice some freestyle right there, confessing that if he didn't do it to warm up and unwind before an important match, he would end up feeling restless and anxious. Meanwhile, Shinji was curled up in the cramped locker, enduring the unbearable stench of old boot sweat and cursing silently. Outside, Nagai agreed with the practice but warned his partner to be careful, not to get into trouble with anyone on the streets, and especially not to get injured, because if anything happened to him, it would be a massive problem for the entire team. Hearing that from inside, the word injured lit a bulb in Shinji's mind, and he smiled in the darkness, realizing that this would be the perfect plan to get his rival out of the way. Far from there, reality was completely different, with the Korean players enjoying their free time to try takoyaki for the first time in their lives, eating and having fun to celebrate and mentally prepare for the next game. When the restaurant bill arrived, it came to a total of 6,000 won for each to pay, but Minsung, wanting to play smart, asked if anyone there was down to eat that takoyaki for free. The guys got excited and said they were in, but immediately wanted to know how he planned to pull that off. Minsung explained that it was simple. They just had to beat the record on that football kick power testing machine right there on the sidewalk. Junsuk complained right away, telling him to stop being an idiot and just split the bill already, and Yojin agreed, saying he didn't want to waste time lingering on the streets. However, Moon jumped into the conversation to provoke the group, asking if they were too scared to lose. Caught by their pride, the rest of the group accepted the bet on the spot, proving they were highly impressionable guys when it came to competition. Moon then reinforced the rules of the game, confirming that whoever placed last and lost would pay the entire 30,000 won bill alone. He was the first to kick, absolutely shattering the machine and scoring an impressive 991 points. Seeing that, Yoyun swallowed hard and thought that idiot was way too strong. He tried to calm down, calculating that he only needed to aim properly and give it his best to avoid finishing at the bottom of the ranking. But the situation grew complicated, because all the others achieved absurd scores right after, with Hyonin scoring 989, Jeon Suk reaching 988, and Min Sung securing 987 points. With his options running out, Yoyun realized he would definitely be last, unless he pulled off a miracle. Under that pressure, he gave it everything he had, channeling all his body's strength to kick the ball, but the machine registered only 975 points, sealing his fate as the official payer of the dinner. With his entire allowance gone down the drain, he wondered in disbelief if those guys had always been such freaks of nature. After paying for the damage and leaving his wallet completely empty, Yejun got distracted for a second and noticed that his teammates had simply vanished into the city fog. Walking alone, he ended up passing by a large crowd gathering on the street and came face to face with that same familiar guy from the ramen shop, the talented freestyle football player who was there winning money from yet another victim on the sidewalk. The young man was pulling his usual bet, challenging anyone and stating that whoever could take the ball from him within 30 seconds would win 10 times the amount wagered. As another brave soul stepped into the circle to try his luck, Sato Ren patiently explained the challenge rules to the public. Watching everything from afar, Yejun analyzed the scene properly with his own eyes and thought that this would be his first real and dangerous challenge since Jeonsuk. But what truly caught his attention was noticing a strange, sinister red glow coming from the man who had accepted the challenge against the footballer, indicating that this mysterious guy was ready to pull a foul move. And in a restaurant close by, which had a window directly overlooking the entire scene and the circle of people on the sidewalk, stood Shinji, watching everything coldly, satisfied with having paid that thug specifically to injure Sato Ren, ensuring he would stay out of tomorrow's game and wouldn't steal his long-awaited spotlight. An hour before all of that happened, Shinji was meeting in disguise with a thug. The man agreed to the job, provided the money was good, and Shinji pointed to the young man doing freestyle football nearby, ordering them to break his leg badly enough so that he could never play football again. The criminal replied that the shit would be a piece of cake. With the money already secured in his hand, the attack began. The man was clearly not trying to challenge for the ball, as his tackle came straight to hurt Sato Ren. Worried, and seeing that there were still 12 seconds left, Sato Ren realized he needed to buy time, not to dodge with the ball, but to dodge the attacker himself. Watching from afar, Song Yoo-jun thought his suspicions were correct. From the moment he saw that red glint in the thug's eyes, he noticed that the man never intended to take the ball, but rather to hurt the player. At that moment, the criminal bumped into Sato Ren, shoving him backward, and found the perfect opening to kick his leg. But just as Sato Ren expected to take the hit, Song Yoo-jun threw himself with everything he had onto the criminal. When the rest of the Korean team members began to approach, the thug took off running, warning that this wasn't over yet. Sun Hyung-nim asked if Song Yoo-jun was okay, and wanted to know who that guy was. Sato Ren approached, asking if Song Yoo-jun wasn't the guy from the ramen shop, and thanked him immediately after, saying that if it weren't for him, he would have been seriously injured. Song Yoo-jun apologized for jumping into the middle of them out of nowhere, and asked what he should call him. The young man introduced himself as Sato Ren, the #1 in freestyle football, and a representative of the Japanese under-17 national team, saying it was a pleasure to meet them. At that moment, Song Yoo-jun thought that Sato Ren was precisely the player from the lineup whom he hadn't recognized from his original timeline, but as soon as he mentioned the word freestyle, his memory flashed back instantly. In his past life, Sun Hanyoung-nim had smacked Song Yoo-jun on the head to wake him up and show him his phone screen, pointing at Sato Ren, the freestyle player from Japan who was the same age as them and absurdly good. Song Yoo-jun remembered that watching the young man's movements and ball control made everything look almost divine, which had made him the youngest in history to reach the top of freestyle football. The shock at that moment was massive, but Song Yoo-jun had never heard of him playing actual football, so he decided to ask if he originally played on the pitch as well. Sato Ren answered no, revealing that the next day, at the Sendai Cup, would be his grand debut. Hearing this, Song Yoo-jun thought everything made sense. After all, in the original timeline, Sato Ren wouldn't even have been in the match against Korea, since he would have been sidelined due to the injury from that fight. Because Song Yoo-jun changed the future by preventing the cowardly act, he ended up saving Sato Ren's destiny. The last time they faced each other, Song Yoo-jun hadn't even been able to touch the ball, and though he knew it would be nearly impossible to steal it from Sato Ren now, he didn't want to let himself be gripped by fear, as he had also improved a lot thanks to the Sendai Cup. To return the courtesy, Song Yoo-jun apologized for the delay and introduced himself as Korea's midfielder. Sato Ren got quite excited and warned that Japan was going to win, but Song Yoo-jun countered, saying they didn't intend to lose by any means either. The two greeted each other with the promise that they would see each other the next day on the pitch. On the day of the clash, the grandstands held far more spectators than usual to watch the grand final of the Sendai Cup between Korea and Japan. The teams from both nations stepped onto the pitch for the long-awaited final match, and Hyung-nim pumped up his teammates, saying that the game was theirs, and they only had one simple thing to do, which was to win. The Korean team entered equally motivated, and as the players lined up, the stadium announcer hyped up the crowd, asking who would be the great hero of that electrifying duel. The ball rolled, and Young-suk was the first to take control, trying to observe how Japan would press them. The Koreans advanced slowly, and the first touch went to Song Yoo-jun, who noticed the Japanese defense was deeply recessed, considering they might be betting on a ultra-defensive strategy. Determined to break their plan, he decided to take the lead. The announcer commented that it would be very difficult to pierce that solid barrier, and the first to try to stop the Korean advance was Shuhei, the Japanese midfielder. However, Song Yoo-jun bypassed him so quickly that his opponent didn't even see the color of the ball. As he advanced, Song Yoo-jun thought the Japanese were too slow, and that, individually, they were below powerhouses like Brazil and France, concluding that if they kept up at that pace, they could definitely win. Leaving Shuhei stretched out behind him in marking, Song Yoo-jun passed forward toward Moon Jung-won. Captain Sun Hyung-nim was open and received the next pass, but the Japanese marking closed in very quickly, and he ended up surrounded. At the same time, Song Yoo-jun also found himself completely locked down by a sea of defenders. The ball was eventually stolen in a 2-on-1 tackle, and the pass came out quickly to the feet of Sato Ren, right in the midfield. At that instant, the Japanese formation opened up entirely, showing that their positioning in the match was excellent for defending, but very slow to shift the game to the attack, leaving only 2 men up front. Observing the play from the bench, Takagi Hideto asked Ito Masaki if that plan would really work, and the coach replied that it wouldn't work for an ordinary player. But Sato Ren was not ordinary, and he charged alone toward the entire Korean defense. The whole backline rushed at him, but the young man began to dribble past one, then dribble past another, juggling the ball at his feet at incredibly high speed. By the time the Korean defense finally realized the trick, the rest of the Japanese team had already had time to push up into the attack, as Sato Ren had held off the markers long enough to clear the play. With 2 defenders glued to the Japanese star, the attack became much easier, and Hikaru, the under-17 national team forward, received it on the wing and crossed it straight into the box. The ball seemed to rise too high, but it dropped perfectly for the tallest player on the team, Nagai Ryo, who rose sovereignly and scored a stunning header. Standing at 1.94 m with absurd jumping power, he used to hammer in plenty of goals just like that. Song Yoo-jun looked at the scoreboard in shock, understanding their trap, which consisted of dropping the defensive line until it was impenetrable, stealing the ball, passing it to Sato Ren to hold up the play by himself, and waiting for the giant Nagai Ryo to rise and finish. From the substitutes bench, Ito Masaki commented proudly that they had the super tower Nagai Ryo and the world-class ball control of Sato Ren, concluding that their black hole strategy was only possible because of the 2 of them, and challenging the Koreans to try and break that invincible tactic. When Japan opened the scoring, the commentator was blown away by the absurd chemistry between Sato Ren and Nagai Ryo. On the other side, Korea knew they would need a powerhouse of a plan to neutralize that duo, but Song Yoo-jun had no idea where to even begin. As soon as the match resumed, he did whatever he could to try and mark Sato Ren closely. However, that movement ended up leaving the midfield completely wide open, forcing the Korean center backs to leave their positions to challenge up front. Song Yoo-jun thought that if this didn't work, he would have to come up with another strategy urgently. They even tried to stop Nagai Ryo by sticking multiple players right on him, but it was far easier said than done, as the guy was a literal giant. On the very next play, the big man's header almost went in, but the Korean goalkeeper made a spectacular save and punched the ball straight back to the defensive line. The problem was that Sato Ren was sharper. He stole the ball immediately after, creating a dangerous situation. On the substitutes bench, Adamasaki was ecstatic, telling his team to keep pulling the Koreans into the black hole. The strategy was working perfectly. Sato Ren would advance and draw everyone toward him. He bypassed the marking with ease, dribbling and shifting his center of gravity so fast that Song Yoo-jun couldn't even register the cutback to the opposite side. In the end, the Japanese star shook off 3 defenders all by himself, leaving the Korean defense completely shattered. Nagai Ryo looked unmarkable inside the box, but this time, the goal didn't come from his head. It was a shot from the wing. Hikaru, the Japanese forward, appeared out of nowhere and slotted it into the net before anyone could notice, extending Japan's lead to 2-0. Song Yoo-jun felt the heavy blow and realized that Nagai Ryo had been used merely as bait. He began to despair, thinking that nothing they tried would work, and that they were completely out of options. Feeling that his ability to read the game wasn't high enough, and frustrated by his inability to stop the infiltration of a single player, he began to question if he was truly cut out for football. Right then, Sun Hyung-nim came out of nowhere and booted him right in the ass, telling the kid to wake up and stop being an idiot. Song Yoo-jun complained, calling his teammate a jerk for talking too much. But Sun Hyung-nim fired back, telling him he'd better figure it out, otherwise the ball would never reach the front line in good shape. While the two bickered, the rest of the team rushed over to break up the brewing internal conflict. Jung-suk approached, asking if everything was okay, and Song Yoo-jun apologized, admitting that Sun Hyung-nim's scolding had snapped him back to his senses. Looking out at the pitch with a calmer mind, he noticed something. It was true. The ball kept going towards Sato Ren. This realization lit a spark in his mind, and he told Jung-suk that he had a plan to save them. The Korean national team positioned themselves for the restart. Seeing the chaos among their opponents, Sato Ren thought the game would be a breeze from here on out. Korea took the kickoff and immediately charged at the Japanese defense. Along the way, Song Yoo-jun analyzed that, aside from Japan's 2-star players, the individual talents of the others weren't all that impressive. However, their collective play managed to halt Korea's attacks because the forwards always fell into a numerical defensive web, allowing Sato Ren to buy time and turn the game around. It seemed like an invincible tactic, but it had one flaw. Song Yoo-jun sprinted and positioned himself exactly in the passing lane between the ball and Sato Ren. At that moment, he recalled the conversation he had with Jung-suk minutes earlier, when his teammate had questioned why they didn't explain the idea to the rest of the team. Song Yoo-jun had replied that it was a play requiring immense mental focus, and that only the two of them together could pull it off. To sum up the tactic, Song Yoo-jun would use his body to shield the defenders, narrowing the passing routes precisely to where Sato Ren usually received the ball. With that, Jung-suk would need to emerge in that blind spot to intercept it. It would be an exhausting task for Jung-suk, who had to monitor the rival's position and movements at all times, something they might not be able to sustain for the entire match. Still, it was worth a shot, and it worked. The exact moment they tried to pick out Sato Ren, Jung-suk appeared like a ghost and stole the ball, without the Japanese number 10 even noticing his presence. Song Yoo-jun smiled, seeing that the strategy based on their combined observation skills had paid off, creating a sort of dual spider-like reading on the field. They surged forward together in a burst of speed, initiating a deadly counterattack. The biggest obstacle was still Japan's solid defensive wall, but Jung-suk thought they needed to take things one step at a time, and released the ball to Song Yoo-jun, who was wide open. Knowing that this chance had been earned through pure grit, the midfielder locked in completely. When the Japanese defense tried to tackle, he predicted the danger zones and the direction of the challenges, dodging them with agility. The announcer went wild as Song Yoo-jun invaded the Japanese half and stepped into the so-called golden zone. He already knew exactly who to find there. The pass was pinpoint accurate to Sun Hyung-nim, who controlled it with class and unleashed a perfect curling shot, bursting the back of the net. It was the goal of the Korean fightback, narrowing the score to 2-1. Song Yoo-jun ran over to the goalscorer and asked if he was satisfied, only to receive a tease from Sun Hyung-nim, who joked that talented guys always need a little push, and that his teammate only played right when someone was buzzing in his ear. Song Yoo-jun laughed, calling the forward a rascal for not even apologizing for the kick, and warned him that he'd be toast after the game. Sun Hyung-nim loved the banter, saying that was the Song Yoo-jun he knew, playing with grit, and called on the team to show what Korea was truly capable of. The match resumed, and curiously, Japan shifted their stance, pushing up with 3 players in attack to try and smother the counter-response, but Song Yoo-jun was sharp, and covered their best offensive passing lane. When they tried to play it to Sato Ren again, Jung-suk read it flawlessly, and intercepted the play once more. Song Yoo-jun celebrated the success of the plan plan in his head, but in the final second of the play, he spotted a Japanese player charging with tremendous aggression toward Jung-suk, trying to win the ball back by brute force. Fortunately for them, the referee blew his whistle right then, bringing the first half to a close. As soon as he sat on the substitutes bench, Song Yoo-jun collapsed from sheer exhaustion. The toll wasn't even so much physical, as his stamina was top-notch, but the mental strain of having to observe and calculate so many variables at the same time was draining much more energy than he had ever anticipated. Jung-suk walked over and handed him a water bottle, warning him to pace himself wisely, because a single slip-up at a decisive moment could throw everything away. Song Yoo-jun took a sip, looked at his teammate with fierce determination, and told him not to worry, guaranteeing that they would turn the match around in the second half no matter what. When the second half kicked off, Sato Ren was already fully alert to Jung-suk's game plan. He had started to feel the heat at the very end of the first half, but now he was absolutely certain Song Yoo-jun was controlling every single passing lane. He just couldn't comprehend how. After all, it wasn't long ago that this kid could barely touch the ball back during that incident at the ramen shop. Now, Song Yoo-jun was completely locking down his playstyle. Far from being irritated, Sato Ren found it highly intriguing. He wanted to see who the real prey was on this field. This time, the pass to Sato Ren was played further ahead, and Jung-suk couldn't track back in time to intercept. Kim Min-sung had to rush over in coverage to help block, resulting in an extremely aggressive battle for the ball. Being the professional he was, Sato Ren managed to dribble and squeeze the ball through a millimeter-wide corridor between the two defenders. However, Song Yoo-jun's eyes were just as sharp, and he anticipated the play, snatching the ball mid-route. The announcer screamed that Song Yoo-jun was reading Sato Ren like an open book. With the ball at their feet, Korea surged forward into a full-throttle attack. Jung-suk advanced alone and visualized the golden zone. The coverage was tight on Sun Hyung-nim, who ended up far away from the action. Even so, Jung-suk stretched his limits, executing a sliding challenge toward the ball and delivering a flawless cross into the box. Another ball in the back of the net for the star striker Sun Hyung-nim, leveling the score. The duo of Song Yoo-jun and Sun Hyung-nim was absolutely flying, folks. Looking at the scoreboard, Nagai Ryo commented that the game had turned out completely different from what they had expected. Sato Ren thought the same, deeply impressed by the speed at which that kid had figured him out on the pitch. He had wanted to save his true potential for the Under-17 World Cup, but he realized that, injury or not, he could no longer hold back. Swapping his boots at the edge of the pitch, he announced that he had only 10 minutes to put an end to this farce. It was all or nothing. The entire stadium was packed to the brim, and the crowd was on fire in those final 10 minutes of the Sendai Cup, where nobody dared to predict who would walk away as champion. Just like in the first half, Song Yoo-jun positioned himself between the Japanese players to try and intercept the pass coming from the midfield. With Jung-suk perfectly locked into his marking assignment, they seemed to have shut down Sato Ren's options. The Japanese players even considered passing to Han, knowing that if they kept forcing it to their number 10 they would lose possession again, but then they noticed that Song Yoo-jun was completely spent, sporting heavy dark circles under his eyes right in the middle of the match. Thinking they could exploit that exhaustion, the Japanese midfielder decided to drive forward himself instead of passing. Song Yoo-jun noticed the penetration, but his body was losing balance and focus. He faltered slightly in his marking, and although Jung-suk rushed to cover the space, he ended up distracted by the movement. That fraction of a second was enough for Sato Ren to control the ball. Even surrounded by the Korean defense, the dynamic instantly shifted. Jung-suk had grown accustomed to his rival's previous speed, but now, with those new boots, something bizarre happened. Sato Ren hit the turbo, cutting through everyone as if they were training cones, and slipped the ball to Nagai Ryo. The defense couldn't stop the big man, but just as he powered a header toward the goal, Moon Jung-won leaped right alongside him and forcefully headed the ball out of bounds, screaming at his team to protect the box. The ball remained completely live in the middle of the pitch, and everyone scrambled to gain possession. Amidst the chaos, a violent clearance launched the ball far into the air, and it ended up landing right at Sato Ren's feet once again. By this point, the Japanese defense had left their backline completely exposed, but the Korean side was equally unprotected. Nobody could stop Sato Ren, except for Song Yoo-jun, who sprinted to stay glued to his hip. It was a completely exhausted Korean against a Japanese star firing on all cylinders. Song Yoo-jun knew he couldn't let his rival get past him under any circumstances. He had to stop him at all costs, even with his concentration failing and his vision blurring from fatigue. Panting heavily, he tried to guess whether the ace would cut left, right, or pass to someone else. He was well aware that, even in perfect condition, stopping Sato Ren on pure technique would be damn near impossible, so he decided to use the exact same trap the Japanese player had used against him back at the ramen shop. Song Yoo-jun threw his entire body weight to the left. Sato Ren anticipated the cut would go right, but he guessed wrong. Song Yoo-jun went the opposite way, anticipated the cutback, and dispossessed his rival with style. No more being dragged along by others. From that moment on, he would be the one to carry the team and dictate the rhythm of the game. The Korean players didn't even have time to think. They just followed Song Yoo-jun's sudden burst of speed. The Japanese defense tried to rush back in desperation because their goal was completely unprotected. With only 1 minute left on the clock, it was their last chance to avoid avoid a penalty shootout. Korea needed that goal to complete the comeback, and Song Yoo-jun, seeing a massive golden zone open up, set up the pass. Son Heung-nim received it and unleashed a rocket of a shot in the very last play of the match. The ball went clean past the goalkeeper and into the back of the net. Goal for Korea, 3-2. In a historic campaign, the Koreans defeated Brazil, France, and finally Japan to claim the Sendai Cup title. On the pitch, the players celebrated in disbelief, immensely proud of Song Yoo-jun and his genius assists. Son Heung-nim finished as the tournament's top scorer, and Song Yoo-jun could barely hold back his emotions. They had won the Sendai Cup. The very moment he had dreamed of so much in his past life was happening right there, vividly before his eyes. It felt incredibly good to be playing real football again. While the party was underway in Japan, back in Seoul, businesswoman Kim Ji-ho was intently watching the sports news. Realizing that Song Yoo-jun had been the ultimate hero of the comeback victory, she decided she needed to meet him as soon as possible. During the award ceremony, the Korean national team celebrated like crazy. In the midst of it all, Dudu Barboza clapped happily for their achievement, while the French team stood by with sour faces of pure frustration. Sato Ren, on the other hand, felt the result was completely well-deserved. After all, anyone who could outperform him on the pitch was more than worthy of the victory. And just like that, that summer filled with passion and football came to an end along with the Sendai Cup. After living through a moment that felt more like a dream, Song Yoo-jun returned to his ordinary teenage routine, attending classes at school. However, instead of paying attention to the lessons, he spent the entire time doodling football tactics in his notebook. Right next to him, curiously enough, Son Hae-nim seemed focused and actually studying. Finding it strange, Song Yoo-jun sneaked a peek at his friend's notebook and discovered that he was in fact researching Korean and Japanese sweets. He laughed to himself, thinking the kid must definitely be diabetic. There was no other explanation. When school ended, while most of the guys made plans to go to the PC Bang or just went home to rest, Song Yoo-jun and the Donju Club crew went straight to the pitch to practice. Since returning to the school team, Song Yoo-jun's pace was much faster, and his passes to Son Heung-nim came off at an eerie, sinister speed. The two had returned from the tournament at a level far above the rest of the school, so much so that they completely crushed the opposition in their practice match. Sitting on the bleachers after training, Song Yoo-jun commented that practice always left him exhausted. Son Heung-nim teased his friend, calling him a weakling and a scrub. That was when the assistant coach approached, letting Song Yoo-jun know that Coach Lee Jung-won was calling for him. Later, the boy went to meet the coach at a diner and was startled to see his own father sitting at the table with him. Completely confused, he asked what his dad was doing there, and the man replied with playful gruffness, saying that an important meeting like this required an adult present. When Song Yoo-jun questioned what kind of meeting it was, the door opened and she appeared, leaving everyone starstruck. It was talent agent Kim Ji-ho. The incredibly beautiful woman right in front of him was precisely the agent Coach Lee Jung-won had promised to introduce once they returned to Korea. She elegantly sat at the table and praised the boy, saying she had been highly impressed by his performance in the Sendai Cup. True to his style, Song Yoo-jun's father slammed a large glass on the table and asked bluntly if his son truly had the profile of a competitive player. To explain her plans, Kim Ji-ho opened a laptop and pulled up a highly colorful PowerPoint slide she had prepared about the player. Song Yoo-jun looked at it and thought that while the woman was indeed meticulous, the slide design was hideous. It looked just like that classic internet meme about graphic design is my passion. Despite her tacky taste in presentations, the agent maintained her composure and announced that, from that point on, she would present what Song Yoo-jun's true competitive edge was in today's football market, leaving the youngster quite curious to see, for the first time, how his football was perceived from the outside. Kim Ji-ho began by explaining that nowadays, the role of the traditional attacking midfielder is heavily diminishing in football. Collective tactics are becoming increasingly organized, and the pressure on the ball carrier has grown immensely. But she assured them that Song Yoo-jun is different. The boy possesses a unique ability to shield the ball, along with the stamina and movement to withstand intense pressure, and above all, the talent required to change the course of a match with goals and assists. In short, he is the perfect type of player for the future of football. Song Yoo-jun, who had actually come from the future in his original timeline, thought the businesswoman was absolutely right, and that she was genuinely good at what she did. After all, he knew that years later, a famous player would emerge with those exact elite characteristics in passing: ball control, coordination, and exceptional vision. The Belgian Kevin De Bruyne. He was considered the evolution of the old classic number 10, a style of athlete that simply did not exist in the era Song Yoo-jun was currently in. Impressed by the precise analysis, Song Yoo-jun's father asked if she already had a specific club in mind to recommend to his son. Kim Ji-ho replied that she had several options, but there was one she treated as a top priority, a Premier League club whose ownership had changed the previous year. She explained that while the team was still viewed as a lower table side, she was certain they would become one of the biggest powerhouses in the world within a few years. When his father asked if this team was famous, Song Yoo-jun smiled, realizing that this woman truly knew her business, because she was talking precisely about Manchester City, De Bruyne's future club. Formulating a plan, the young man thought he absolutely had to sign with her. The moment he picked up the document and saw the Manchester City logo, he remembered that at this time, they were indeed just a mid-table team, but they would turn into giants very soon. He knew that even if he shined in the U17 World Cup, the chances of receiving a direct offer from a world-class elite club were slim, so the smartest move was to aim for a stepping stone club like Manchester City. Since this was still a time when almost no Korean players went abroad, and few people understood the foreign market, Kim Ji-ho's international vision was incredible, giving Song Yoo-jun the absolute certainty he needed to seal the deal. A week after signing with his agent, Song Yoo-jun was already showing a much better performance in training over at the U17 national team's training center. In the middle of practice, he ended up getting a bit distracted thinking about his agent. She was flawless when it came to football, but rather clumsy with everything else, constantly spilling her coffee and creating those hideous designs on her slides. Suddenly, Sun Hyung-nim approached with a newspaper, letting him know that yet another article about Song Yoo-jun had been published, and it was already the 10th one. With everyone on the team hyped up by all the media buzz, the striker asked, a bit jealously, what made his friend so damn special to get that many headlines. Song Yoo-jun didn't miss the chance to tease him, and replied that it was simply because he was better looking, laughing at the look on his face. To make matters worse, Kim Min-sung chimed in, pointing out that Sun Hyung-nim had only gotten 5 articles so far. Song Yoo-jun found his friend's expression so hilarious that he ended up spitting on him from laughing so hard. Absolutely furious, Sun Hyung-nim grabbed a training cone, looked at Kim Min-sung, and told him to keep watch and count how many more articles would drop by the end of the day, warning that he was going to beat Song Yoo-jun's face until he became a headline himself. While running for his life from that sweet-toothed demon, Song Yoo-jun reflected on how the U17 World Cup hadn't always been such a special event. The main World Cup was indeed the biggest and most prestigious global event, watched by billions of people, but when you put a youth category in front of it, things changed completely. In a normal U17 World Cup, most of the athletes haven't even made their professional debuts yet. The crowds are small, there is no TV broadcast, and barely anyone cares. However, this specific tournament was receiving an unusual amount of attention. He realized that his actions must have altered the future again, shifting the timeline. Knowing that all this extra attention could land him an even better contract if he shined, he resolved that he would defeat any opponent, no matter who they were. Just in the middle of this heroic thought though, he got distracted and took a violent hit from a cone right to the face. Later in the locker room, just as the group stage draw was about to begin, Song Yoo-jun and Nagai Ryo still hadn't shown up. The two only walked in on their way back from the infirmary, with Song Yoo-jun sporting a heavily swollen face from the cone assault. With everyone gathered, the drawing of the U17 Cup groups finally commenced. Song Yoo-jun kept thinking that it shouldn't matter who they played against, but that it would still be nice to get an easier group just to catch a breath. When Group C was announced, Moon Jung-won commented to his teammates that it would be great if Korea got drawn right there. However, the first country drawn as the top seed for Group C was Argentina, making Moon Jung-won instantly change his mind and say he didn't want that group at all anymore. The next team drawn was Senegal, leading Song Yoo-jun to assess that the situation there was already incredibly tough. To complete the nightmare, the third national team drawn was Germany. Group C had officially transformed into the legitimate group of death, and to the absolute misfortune of the Koreans, the final ball revealed was none other than Korea, throwing the team straight into the worst possible scenario of the tournament. Later on, the U17 national team was already training hard in Enugu, at Nigeria's national training center. The heat there was brutal, so much so that Moon was nearly dying of exhaustion, and even questioned whether it was truly necessary to go through such a grueling local adaptation training. Jungwon quickly cut him off and explained that their bodies absolutely needed to get used to that muggy weather, so they could play at full strength on match day, ordering everyone to keep running without complaining. As soon as the U17 World Cup groups were decided, the delegation traveled straight to Nigeria, the tournament's host country. That was already their second day there, and adapting was proving to be a massive challenge, but the whole group was pushing themselves to the limit because they knew their first opponent would be none other than the feared Germany. The real trouble in Yoo-jun's mind had started 2 days prior, still on the flight from Korea to Nigeria, when he came across something shocking in a document he received. Ji-ho had handed him a folder with detailed data on all the players in Group C, containing playing styles, recent records, and a summary of each one's latest matches. At the time, Yoo-jun even asked if all of that was part of her job as an agent, and she confirmed that collecting and analyzing opponents' performances was indeed one of her duties. However, the young woman was in such a rush that she said a quick goodbye so she wouldn't miss her flight, showing how scattered and clumsy she could be sometimes. Analyzing the papers, Yoo-jun realized that if that information was correct, the team would be in deep trouble, as the future best players in the world seemed to be concentrated precisely in that German squad. He wondered what on earth had happened in the year 1992 for everyone born back then to become a football star, since Korea was about to face one of the most powerful German generations in history. At night, resting in the Korean dormitory, Min-sung asked his teammates if everyone wasn't getting too worn out by the intensity of the practices. Jung-woo, another midfielder on the team, agreed and said that the stifling heat helped drain their energy, but that the coaching staff was definitely pushing them harder than usual. Moon joined the conversation conversation complaining about the weather in that place, and confessed he didn't even have much of an appetite, forcing food down just to withstand the toll of dehydration. That was when Min-sung looked around and asked where those two idiots Yoo-jun and Hyung-nim were. Moon thought it was a silly question, as it was obvious that at such an hour, the two of them would be out on the pitch. And they really were. Yoo-jun was spending his time practicing finishes in front of a training wall, and on one of his attempts the ball rattled the crossbar. Hyung-nim didn't miss the chance, gave his friend a kick, and started mocking him, saying the guy could still be that bad even after taking lessons from him for an entire month, adding that he took absolutely no pride in such a clumsy student. Yoo-jun had actually begged for Hyung-nim's help after realizing his shot was way too weak back when they played in Japan, but now his friend just used that as an excuse to rub it in his face. Annoyed by the teasing, Yoo-jun set the ball on the mark and challenged his teammate to do better, betting that if he missed the shot, he would have to become his servant and do whatever he wanted for a week. But while he was still finishing his sentence, Hyung-nim ran up and smashed a strike that went straight into the net like a missile. Laughing at the situation, Hyung-nim immediately started celebrating that Yoo-jun would now be his slave for the next 7 days. That left Yoo-jun pensive and quite frustrated, questioning if the gap in their skill levels was really that absurd. After all, if Hyung-nim, who played such a great game of football, hadn't received any offers from a major elite European club yet, his own situation was even worse, and his chances of getting an opportunity in the market were almost zero if he didn't improve fast. The two stayed out there and trained for an extra 2 hours, even after spending the whole day under the sun. Hyung-nim finally asked to stop because extreme hunger had kicked in, but Yoo-jun warned that he intended to stay on the pitch a bit longer. His friend advised him not to push too hard so he wouldn't get injured, and the young man replied with all the determination in the world that he would do absolutely everything within his power. Hyung-nim found that answer super weird, saying it sounded like cliché lines from a manhwa protagonist, and that it was cringeworthy, but he quickly followed up by saying he couldn't leave his new slave behind, and decided to stay to train him for a bit longer. On the big day of the clash, Namji Stadium was completely packed for the opening matches of Group C in the U17 World Cup. The Korean commentators and analysts in the broadcast booth were already preparing the audience, warning that it would be an incredibly tough battle against Germany. As the channels began their live coverage, the athletes walked onto the pitch, with Korea wearing their traditional red kit and Germany sporting their classic white jersey. The physical imposingness of the Germans immediately caught everyone's attention, as they were very tall and strong, the result of an intensive training system that was a benchmark worldwide. The German goalkeeper looked to the side and thought the Koreans looked like a bunch of little kids, while the other European players chatted among themselves about what they would eat after the match, showing not the slightest concern and treating the game as a guaranteed win. On the other hand, Yoo-jun felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that the whole world would be watching that match, and was determined to give his life on the pitch to evolve his game and catch the eye of a scout. The referee blew the whistle and the game began at an absurd intensity, with suffocating German pressing. When Yoo-jun found himself face to face with an opponent with grayish-blue eyes and blonde hair, he immediately remembered Jiho's analysis report on Thomas Richter, an athlete who possessed refined dribbling and tremendous individual skill. The document warned that when the match started, the probability of that guy breaking through the first line of defense was 87%. Yoo-jun anticipated his movements and managed to make a clean tackle, celebrating mentally that the data provided by the young woman was extremely reliable and that perhaps his own skills were merging perfectly with those insights. However, the joy was short-lived, as he was immediately pressured by Luigi Getz. The rival came in with a fast slide tackle, and even though Yoo-jun could visualize the red zone mechanism in his field of vision, the play was too fast and the ball ended up being stolen. While running back to make up for the mistake, he tried to understand how he had lost that play, since theoretically, the system worked flawlessly. A black arrow would appear, indicating the exact trajectory of the slide tackle. The red light would start filling the space, and as soon as it completely covered the arrow, the tackle would happen, making it impossible to miss the reaction timing. But the reality there at the World Cup was different. Unlike the players he faced in the Sendai Cup, the speed at which that red light shot up and filled the arrow was infinitely faster, which meant he would need to think and move much quicker if he wanted to compete at that level. When the ball was played to Yoo-jun, he found himself once again under Luigi's relentless marking. The young man knew perfectly well that his dribbles were far too weak to escape his rival's pinpoint tackles. Even while visualizing the red zone warning, he tried to dodge to the side, but ended up dispossessed yet again. In a completely clumsy sequence, Yoo-jun managed at the very last second to poke the ball to Jung-woo. The pass came out totally crooked and off balance, forcing his teammate into a fierce battle for possession. Fortunately, Jung-woo showed great resourcefulness and cleared the play with a beautiful roulette, leaving the commentator impressed by that sudden evolution in ball control. The midfielder then picked out Seokjin, but the forward was simply run over by a force of nature named Antony, who cleared the ball far away. On the rebound, the German midfielder Oliver controlled it with class on his chest and fed it back to Max, the team's center forward. Jung-suk anticipated the play, but realized he was too far away to attempt a tackle with his feet. That was when Min-sung flashed his speed, beat his man to the ball, and quickly passed it to Yoo-jun, who initiated a coordinated press along with Jungsuk. The relief was short-lived. As Yoo-jun saw that dreadful red zone flashing once more, Luigi's slide tackle came from behind, caught him by surprise, but the Korean managed to shield the ball in the final millisecond. The German defender actually praised the kid's reflexes, but followed it up with a taunt, questioning how long he thought he could keep dodging like that. Suddenly, the scenario in Yoo-jun's mind shifted drastically. Multiple red arrows appeared all around him at the same time, giving the distinct impression that his opponent would cover every single space at once. With the reaction timing for each tackle completely irregular, the midfielder began to lose his balance, opening up a gap for two more German players to close in. It was in the middle of that bottleneck that Yoo-jun spotted, deep in the field, a golden zone glowing through a razor-thin corridor. The German defense didn't even imagine that it would result in danger, as none of them noticed the movement of Hyungnim, who was already sprinting toward that sacred space. The forward ran in amazement, wondering how his teammate had managed to see that absurd gap. The Europeans tried to pull off an offside trap, but Hyungnim's off-the-ball movement was flawless, and he broke free. Upon stepping into the golden zone, he unleashed a marvelous curling shot, one of those that are incredibly tough to save. The problem was that the goalkeeper on the other side was Spiegel, a true wall, who used his massive height and incredible wingspan to make a spectacular save. Hyungnim lamented the missed chance, praising his own shot, while Yoo-jun digested the play, thinking that perhaps not even with a pixel-perfect pass would they score. From then on, his obsession would be to focus solely on feeding that golden zone. In the stands, the stadium's eyes weren't just on the pitch. In the VIP section, one man in particular followed everything with redoubled attention, visibly impressed by the Asian's composure. That was Mark Nicol, chief scout for Liverpool, who definitely did not expect to find athletes of that caliber in the matchup, and decided to monitor them more closely. Meanwhile, in the locker room during halftime, Yoo-jun collapsed onto the Korean national team bench, consumed by an overwhelming mental exhaustion. That was getting ridiculous. After that first opportunity created, the golden zone had flashed in his field of vision several other times, but he had ended up misplacing the pass or getting blocked on nearly half of his attempts. He was fully aware that his technical attributes were limited, but he hadn't imagined that the physical and tactical chasm between them and the Europeans would be so gigantic. It became clear that there was still a long road ahead to reach that level. The second half began, and Yoo-jun went back to driving the ball, trying to organize the team. He could pinpoint the golden zone, but would end up tackled halfway through. On the next attack, the scene repeated itself. He was intercepted. On the subsequent charge, the same old story. The space was right there, but he simply couldn't lock in the assist. Frustration took over the young man, who couldn't accept the fact that he hadn't executed a single proper play in that half. Amidst this whirlwind of thoughts, he ended up surrounded and lost the ball to Luigi once more. Korea tried to smother the buildup, but the German midfielder bypassed the press with extreme ease and speed, invading the Korean danger zone. Min-sung trusted the solidity of his backline, but Luigi found an unbelievable passing lane, threading the defense. The ball found the foot of the German striker, who struck it cleanly on the volley, but the Korean goalkeeper, Cha Sung-min, pulled off a miracle and saved the rocket, tipping it out for a corner. Watching the play, Yoo-jun swallowed hard as he realized his rival could orchestrate an assist like that without needing any visual tools or golden zones. In his dribbling, positioning, and passing, the European played on a completely different level. Still in the VIP area, Mark remained focused on the Korean boys, while beside him, sipping a glass of wine to unwind, Chelsea's chief scout, Diem Reeves, asked disdainfully if Germany had opened the scoring yet. To Diem, a matchup like that had an obvious outcome, and there was no reason to waste brain cells paying attention. His plan was merely to assess the boys' physical stamina and then head out for a drink. That was when Mark questioned him about the real importance of the U17 category, reminding his colleague that although the tournament didn't generate massive viewership or rivers of money, that was precisely where true phenomena emerged. Diem quickly caught onto his friend's interest and asked if he had his eyes on number 17, Yoo-jun, arguing that the reports on the kid had nothing special about them. Curious, the Chelsea scout decided to analyze the midfielder closely. Right at the moment Yoo-jun used his powers of observation to steal a ball in midfield, Diem began to dictate his notes out loud, assessing that defensively the boy was a regular B-grade player, that he had a completely awkward posture when driving and holding up the ball, and that his short and long passes under pressure were acceptable, alongside having a decent engine. He concluded by saying that, with a lot of luck, he would at best fit into a B team in Europe, and teased his partner, asking if Liverpool's legendary scouting instinct was getting outdated. Mark just smiled and hit back, saying that the real show was about to begin. The clock was ticking against the Koreans, and the game was already into the standard 3 minutes of stoppage time when Yoo-jun drove with the ball toward Germany's danger zone. The defensive wall set up by the Europeans seemed insurmountable, leaving only a bare minimum of players up front and completely locking down the penalty area. Korea's final chance at victory rested squarely on Yoo-jun's feet. He felt the pressure and could clearly visualize the golden zone, but the block was so dense that he didn't know how to get the ball through. If he tried to cross it over the top, the center back's height would easily clear it, and trying to dribble in such tight space was suicide. In the stands, Dame commented that the kid had no angle and that his delay in making a decision only proved he was a third-tier player. The Chelsea scout just hadn't anticipated the sheer genius of the next move. To everyone's surprise, Yoo-jun struck the ball from right there, using the outside of his boot for a spectacular trivela cross. The ball curled perfectly around the marking and dropped alive right at Hyungnim's feet, who smashed it home on the volley. The shot rippled the back of the net, leaving the goalkeeper with absolutely no chance. The referee blew the final whistle, with the score at 1-0 for Korea, sealing a historic and monumental victory against the giant Germany. In the scouts booth, Deem was left jaw-dropped, admitting that the play looked completely angleless, and that the kid had managed to orchestrate and see that passing lane amidst the chaos. He had to acknowledge that while Yoo-jun's other technical skills might seem ordinary, his ability to read the game and create plays was of an absolute elite level. At the end of the day, Coach Yongwon couldn't hide his pride and enthusiastically praised the squad, stating that they had done the best possible job against the powerhouse Germany. To reward their effort, he announced that the team would have 2 consecutive days of complete time off from practice, so they could rest up and recharge. However, looking around, the atmosphere in the locker room wasn't festive. The players had their heads down and looked visibly dejected. Yoo-jun instantly figured out the reason behind the collective dampener, reflecting that it was perfectly normal for them to feel that way, since they had experienced firsthand the brutal gap in technical skill during those 90 minutes. Korea had won as a united group, but individually, everyone there felt they had lost their personal duels. After all, more than half of the German roster consisted of world-renowned prospects, and the midfielder knew that if you aim for football's highest stages, basically everyone becomes your rival, and a single slip-up that leaves you behind can mean the end of the line. It was a frustrating realization, but Yoo-jun also had to swallow his pride and admit that his own skills needed urgent evolution. There was no other way but to give his all and do absolutely everything within his power from that moment on. Driven by this urgency, later on, the young man sought out his teammate Jungwoo for a frank conversation and, putting his shyness aside, begged him to please teach him how to dribble. The next morning, the two were already walking together through the completely packed and noisy streets of Nigeria. Yoo-jun thought to himself that he had never properly noticed his teammate's talent due to him always being very quiet and reserved, but the truth was that Jungwoo possessed an impressive and refined dribbling ability. While imagining himself achieving that level of control, the boy noticed that his friend was guiding him in the exact opposite direction of the training grounds, ending up right in the middle of the bustling Enugu Central Market. Stopping there, Jungwoo smiled and explained that it was precisely in that human anthill that his dribbling had evolved. He recalled that in his childhood he was terrible at football, but he made up for it with pure enthusiasm, until one day he was invited by the other kids to fill a spot in a pickup game and got incredibly nervous. The boys from the neighborhood even commented that they were just one player short to fill the team, but since Jungwoo didn't know how to dribble and lost the ball easily, he ended up excluded and sidelined by the group. Embarrassed, the little boy replied that it was no problem and made up an excuse that he needed to head back to help his mother at the family shop. When he walked inside, his mother found his early return strange and asked why he had arrived so soon, questioning if he didn't want to take advantage of the day to play with his friends. The boy lied, saying everyone was busy, and his mother then asked him to help her by picking up some cabbage at the market. He left the house with the shopping list memorized, repeating to himself that he needed to bring back 3 cabbages, lettuce, and soy sauce. Until halfway there, he came across a resident discarding an old, completely battered football on the sidewalk. Little Jungwoo looked at the abandoned object and felt an uncontrollable urge to kick that ball, but he knew he had an important delivery to make. Torn between duty and passion, he made a bold decision and dove into the market, driving the ball while gathering the ingredients. Back in the present, the midfielder explained to Yoo-jun that in the beginning it took him over 5 minutes just to manage to move forward to the house right ahead without losing control. However, by repeating that grueling routine day after day, year after year, for 5 straight years, he simply learned to dribble past the entire Enugu market and could now cross the space from end to end in those same 5 minutes. Yoo-jun stood admiring his friend's movements, finding his ball progression absurdly clean, graceful, and efficient. That was when Jungwoo tossed the ball toward his partner and warned him that now it was his turn, stipulating that the main objective of that crazy training was to cross the market without bumping into absolutely anyone, challenging him to start whenever he was ready. Yoo-jun positioned himself in the middle of the flow of people, initially thinking that the crowd walked quite slowly and that it would be an easy task, even doubting if that would truly serve as real training. He had barely taken his first steps when a pack of children came running past and plowed into him, making the young man almost bite the dust, while right after, a pole carrying fish nearly hit him dead in the face. Startled, the youth wondered what kind of crazy market that was, where people popped out of nowhere or broke his balance on purpose. But the light bulb quickly went off, and he realized that insanity was actually the perfect training to simulate tackles at completely unpredictable tempos and learn to react instantly when his physical posture was broken. The boy loved the dynamic and threw himself into it body and soul, spending the entire morning at the market, following it up with an individual training session at lunchtime, and only wrapping up his work when night had already fallen. He was completely exhausted and physically broken when his phone began to ring, ring, indicating a call from his agent. Even at the absolute limit of his fatigue, Yoojun answered, and Jiho went straight to the point. She acknowledged that he must be running on fumes but warned him that the agency had just received a bombshell call from a club in England. The boy was in complete shock, unable to believe that just one excellent performance on the pitch was enough to attract the attention of English football so immediately. He asked, somewhat hesitantly, if the inquiry came from a third division team, but Jiho promptly fired back saying no, as it was a Premier League side, the elite of world football. When she revealed the name, Yoojun felt his heart race and asked if Liverpool had truly made contact, marveled by the idea of a giant of that stature looking for him after a single match. He wanted to know if the contract terms and figures had already been sent, but the agent reined in his excitement, explaining that it didn't constitute an official bid just yet. She detailed that powerhouses like Liverpool have countless internal processes and filters before formalizing an offer, and before going through all that bureaucracy, that call served to put a stamp on the player's name and leave a clear statement of interest so he wouldn't fade from their radar. The boy realized he had gotten ahead of himself and, keeping his feet on the ground, told his manager that he would push himself and train even harder from then on. Jiho affectionately recommended that he shouldn't overdo it, because if he could maintain his current level of football, official offers would surely arrive, wrapping up the call by telling him to get some good rest. Hanging up the phone, Yoojun reflected that if he merely maintained his current level, he would be summarily crushed by his opponents from there on out. Mentally apologizing to his agent for disobeying her advice, he went right back to training hard well into the early hours of the morning. Finally, the day of another decisive clash in the U17 World Cup arrived to shake up Group C, bringing the national teams of Korea and Senegal face to face. After shocking the planet by taking down the mighty Germany, the Asians knew it was time to keep the momentum going and prove they weren't a flash in the pan. Korea took the pitch lined up in their typical 4-2-3-1 formation, while the Senegal squad, widely famous for their colossal physical strength, athletic vigor, and sprinter-like speed, deployed in an aggressive 4-3-3. With a pinned three-man frontline, the promise was a highly vertical and attacking game from the Africans, testing the Koreans' unbreakable fighting spirit against pure opposition power and pace. As soon as the duel kicked off, the VIP booth once again recorded the presence of Mark Nicol and Deem Reeves. Deem, already uncorking another bottle of wine to enjoy the spectacle, commented that the match promised to be a very good one, also noting that the stands were packed with other European scouts this time. Mark agreed, pointing out that the heavy scouting presence was a direct consequence of Korea's triumph over Germany, which piqued the curiosity of his Chelsea colleague. Deem egged his friend on, asking if he thought Yoojun would pull off some magic again today, making the Liverpool scout silently reflect that since the press had been calling the previous result a miracle, the question still remained whether it was all just pure luck or if the kid truly was the real deal. Eager to see how the midfielder would fare from now on, the one certainty was that Korea had left their underdog status behind and were now playing toe-to-toe against the giants. Life didn't start out easy for number 17, and Yoojun had the ball easily stolen by Senegal's midfielder Papis, who celebrated the play thinking that, as expected, simply cutting off the passing lanes was enough to completely neutralize the opponent's threats. The African players quickly mapped out Korea's predictable movement and began to dominate actions in midfield, anticipating plays and intercepting the ball before it could even reach the Korean playmaker's feet. Yoojun realized the trap and noticed that it was the exact same tactic the Japan national team had used against him in the Sendai Cup, a strategy focused exclusively on isolating him and taking him out of the game. However, he smiled inwardly upon noticing they had picked the wrong target, beginning to strategically run away from the epicenter of the play to drag his markers with him. Papis followed him closely, thinking the Korean was desperate and mentally swearing that he would stick to his back as many times as it took to ensure Korea created absolutely nothing in the matchup. The nullification tactic worked on both sides, and the clock ticked away relentlessly until the middle of the second half, with the score stagnant at 0-0 in an extremely physical, tense match that was hard to predict who would have the breakthrough. Papis remained firmly glued to his rival, but fatigue took its toll. Yoojun possessed an enviable engine and seemed to never tire, and as soon as he noticed his African marker had hit his physical limit, the Korean turned on the burners and accelerated his pace even further. High up in the stands, the foreign scouts commented on Korea's promising midfield, but one of them downplayed the boy's talent, assessing that he seemed to be just an ordinary box-to-box midfielder and that clubs were wasting their time there. Right at the instant the man finished uttering that criticism, Yoojun shattered the tactical system and broke through the defensive line with a spectacular burst of pace. Moon read the play perfectly and triggered a flawless pass right into his teammate's feet. Number 17 controlled it, lifted his head and whipped a magnificent cross into the penalty box, placing the ball surgically into the golden zone. Yoojun himself ghosted in at speed to capitalize on the assist he had drawn up, and beating the backline to it, hit a firm header into the back of the net, opening the score with an absolute worldie. The masterpiece on the pitch caused an immediate uproar in the VIP area, prompting several scouts to pull out their phones and call their respective clubs right then and there, stunned by the fact that such a pixel-perfect pass could never come from an ordinary player. Labeling the play play as ridiculously genius. Dean was left perplexed and admitted that the assist had been complete insanity, giving the distinct impression that the boy could foresee exactly where the opponent's goal would open up, jokingly confessing that his urge was to hide that talent so nobody else would sign him. Mark smiled proudly, convinced that the kid had finally proven his worth and shown that the victory against Germany hadn't been a stroke of luck, but rather pure technical competence, leaving now only the question of which European giant would secure his signature first. Regulation time expired shortly after, and Korea confirmed a major 1-0 victory against a strong Senegal. On the pitch, Moon hugged his teammates, unable to believe they had truly beaten another world powerhouse, while Hyung-Nim celebrated ecstatically with the group, loudly praising that Korea had run over Germany and Senegal back-to-back, stamping 2 consecutive and historic victories in the tournament. People realized that Korea had already qualified for the round of 16, and meanwhile, Ji-ho's computer wouldn't stop receiving messages. On the other side, Coach Jungwon was doing his job, analyzing the matches in detail for the first time. He watched a video of Yoojin advancing through the center of the opponent's penalty area and slotting a precise pass right in front of the goal, realizing the kid had been the one largely responsible for sorting everything out in the qualifiers. He already knew the youngster was special, but he hadn't imagined he was this far above average. At that exact moment, the coach was waiting to meet with Mark, the Liverpool scout. Meanwhile, Yoojin went back to the Diagonal Market to focus on his individual training, trying to dribble while dodging people in the area. Once again, he bumped into someone along the way and couldn't make it to the other side, noticing just how difficult it was. The biggest problem happened when he spotted the golden zone. He lost too much time trying to over-evade with his dribbling, when the correct move would be to keep his center of gravity steady, lightly dodge the tackle, and shoot straight for the zone as soon as he broke free. He took a deep breath and tried to stay calm, thinking that if he just kept walking without stopping, he would get there eventually, but he was interrupted by Youngwon, who showed up to talk. Later, the two were eating mangoes together, and the coach commented that the boy was overdoing his routine, since he was training dribbles with Youngsuk, participating in team activities, doing individual training, and still practicing finishing with Hyungnim at night. The trainer warned him that he would end up burning out and needed to slow down to manage his exercise load. Yoojin agreed, but quickly asked what the commander was doing there at the market. Youngwon recalled an old conversation they had about the athlete's professional future, and revealed that the Liverpool scout had approached him that day to ask for information, explaining that scouts usually speak directly to the coach because it's the fastest way to get to know prospects. Straight to the point, the coach confessed he didn't want to see the youngster go to Liverpool, and Yoojin understood the reason instantly. The English club's big star was Steven Gerrard, a complete legend with perfect attributes who played in the exact same position as him, and still had many years left in his career, which would mean sitting on the bench. The coach was honest and said Liverpool was a great opportunity, but given the current context, it would take a long time to win a spot, and he might even need to change positions. Asking next if the boy had considered another club, Yoojin thought to himself that he was looking for a specific pattern, a club like Manchester, which was currently underrated, but would explode in the future, allowing him to learn a lot from the squad, though he couldn't reveal he came from the future. It was then that Youngwon revealed that, besides Liverpool, Paris Saint-Germain had also got in touch. The young player knew the French club was still weak at that time, but would receive heavy investment in a few years to become a giant, making it an excellent opportunity. He excused himself to head back to the lodging first and ran off, making it clear to the coach how much he liked the idea. On the way, Yoojin analyzed that PSG would become a powerhouse, but their peak would only come a year or two after Manchester's, and since time was golden for him, France wasn't the best definitive option, though he couldn't let the chance slip away. Elsewhere, sports agent Ji-ho was anxiously waiting for noon so she could have a peaceful lunch. As soon as she grabbed her lunchbox and served herself, the phone started ringing, disrupting her rest. It was Yoojin asking if she had been contacted by Paris Saint-Germain. Surprised, she wanted to know how he already knew and explained that several clubs had reached out, but she intended to give him the full report the next day. The player explained he found out from the coach and asked if the French side had sent a formal proposal. Ji-ho replied not yet, but they showed much more interest than Liverpool and promised to get back soon. She commented that immediate contracts were rare, but he could try for a provisional agreement. Taking advantage of the opening, Yoojin asked to include a guaranteed playing time clause in the contract. Ji-ho felt proud of the boy's firm stance and agreed to request the demand along with the proposal. The youth knew that this kind of requirement was extremely valuable and almost never accepted by clubs, being reserved only for rare, proven gems of football. Since PSG was a national-level club similar to Manchester, it was worth a shot. If the French accepted, he could demand the same thing from the English club later. Now all that was left was to train at home and wait. While at the Paris Saint-Germain headquarters, the executives commented on how bold and interesting the kid was. On the day of the next match at the Namji Stadium, the Koreans tried to block Argentina's advance. Yoojin watched from the stands alongside Moon and Jungsuk, since Korea was already guaranteed in the round of 16, and took the field with the reserve team to rest the starters. The problem was that the reserve team was doing terribly, and the 3-0 scoreline for Argentina still in the first half was embarrassing. The main mistake lay in the creative sector, occupied by by Ju Chan, who despite being a good player, didn't know how to read spaces or distribute the ball, causing the team to collapse. Watching from the outside, the protagonist realized how much his absence affected the team and promised to push himself even harder in training, even though he was already at his absolute limit of exhaustion. The game ended 4-0 for Argentina, but Korea's qualification was already locked in. Coach Jungwon gathered the group to congratulate everyone on topping the group and announced that their opponent in the round of 16 would be England, leaving everyone surprised and tense due to the difficult bracket. Yoo-jun knew the English were the creators of the sport and had an excellent foundation. Analyzing the options, he searched for the name of Harry Kane, the player who would dominate the global scene until his death in the other timeline, but noticed he wasn't on the list back then yet. Even without their main star, England remained incredibly strong, but upon observing a specific player in the opponent's squad, the youth felt they had a chance to win, going back to training curveballs during the night. The veteran Hyung-nim commented that the kid's shot had improved a tiny bit, which made Yoo-jun find the sudden praise strange and ask if his teammate was sick. Hyung-nim complained, calling him a brat from hell for complaining even when he got a compliment, but soon pointed out that he still had a long way to go because the ball wasn't curving enough since he wasn't putting enough power into his ankle, telling him to repeat the motion. Yoo-jun shot back saying he was putting a fucking lot of power into his ankle and tried again, but Hyung-nim kept criticizing. He tried once, twice, several times in a row under his teammates' protests until, later on, the young player was stretched out on the ground. Exhausted, he acknowledged that training that seriously was hard as hell, but admired how Hyung-nim looked like a monster executing that technique, admitting he was dead for the day. Before wrapping up, Yoo-jun warned that he had something important to tell him about the upcoming game against England. On the day of the clash, the commentator enthusiastically announced that the big moment had finally arrived and that everyone was there to watch the decisive match that would determine who advanced to the quarterfinals in a true knockout stage atmosphere. Yoo-jun knew full well that this game was far more important than any other. Since the Premier League is the top professional league in England and hosts the majority of English athletes, the big clubs would definitely send their scouts to observe the top talents, and the young Korean needed to win over those professionals. In the stands, a scout named Deem commented that he was betting on an English victory this time, to which Mark ironically replied, reminding his colleague that he had been dying to sign Yoo-jun from Korea and was now choosing England. Deem defended himself by arguing that the game would be no walk in the park for the boy, especially because he had to face the opponent's number 35, the feared Bogart. As soon as the game began, England showed difficulty stringing passes together, but Bogart quickly imposed himself physically in marking. The number 35 used an agile feint to bypass the defense, leaving player Jerry Bogart completely free to receive the pass. Yoo-jun moved quickly to try to intercept the play and cut off the passing lane, but he ended up falling for another one of Bogart's feints. The English pass was perfect, keeping England in control of the ball. The protagonist knew Jerry Bogart's reputation well, aware of his excellent off-the-ball movement and absurd ankle strength, which generated dangerous mid-range shots and high-speed dribbles. However, the rival's greatest weapon was his wide field of vision and quick, one-touch passes, which made the ball fly far out of Yoo-jun's reach once again, until it found Oliver, who unleashed a mid-range shot that rattled the crossbar. Realizing that the ball kept getting stuck in the defensive block, Yoo-jun understood he needed to break that barrier through the midfield. Remembering what he had seen in Korea's defeat against Argentina, he ran forward, taking responsibility upon himself, visualized the first red zone, and dodged a sliding tackle. Even surrounded on multiple sides, he managed to escape and gained precious time to pass to Jungwoo, initiating Korea's counterattack. In the stands, a rookie scout with a laptop commented to his partner that, looking at it from any angle, the difference in quality was just too big and the result seemed predetermined since South Korea didn't have decent players, suggesting they treat it like a vacation trip, and asking the experienced Gary if it wouldn't be better to watch the game from the VIP lounge. Gary asked how long the young man had been working at the club, and upon hearing it had only been 6 months, offered a valuable piece of advice. He explained that talented players easily show up in statistics, but the real ones, the ones who change tomorrow, only reveal themselves amid sweat, screams, the scorching air, trembling eyes, and when facing a crossroads, something you never see from behind the glass window of a VIP lounge. He concluded by saying that anyone who can capture those details becomes a top-tier scout, revealing himself as Gary Eakes, the academy director of Manchester United. Meanwhile, on the pitch, Yoo-jun and striker Hyung-nim exchanged looks to put into practice the plan they had drawn up the night before. On that occasion, the midfielder had handed over a tactical sheet and instructed his teammate to sprint behind a specific defender as soon as he got the signal, and the striker had confidently accepted. In the present, however, Hyung-nim was struggling to shake off the heavy marking of centre-back Harry Maguire, who looked like an untiring wardrobe. That was when Jung-suk managed to pass the ball to Yoo-jun, who immediately signaled Hyung-nim to advance. The striker bolted forward, and though he was closely tracked by the massive defender, he managed to find a pocket of space. Coming from the year 2023, Yoo-jun knew Harry Maguire's weakness all too well, the space he usually left behind his back, and his slow pace. The star player's pass was perfect, and tailor-made for Hyung-nim, who struck it at first time. The ball still grazed the goalkeeper's fingers before shaking the net and opening the scoreboard for Korea at 1-0. During the celebration, the striker praised the precision of the play, realizing his teammate knew exactly how the big man would react. In the stands, the rookie scout with the laptop was stunned by the Korean goal against England, and his boss Gary agreed that Hyung-nim was very good, but highlighted that Yoo-jun's pass had been straight, decisive, and delivered with an unusual coldness for a rookie, as if he already knew the goal would happen. Resolute, Gary prepared to make a phone call to report what he had just seen directly to the legendary manager Alex Ferguson. At that moment, every scout present had their eyes locked on the young Korean, viewing him as a player they needed to sign at all costs. The clock already marked 87 minutes of play in the U17 World Cup, a tournament known as the Olympics of Prospects, where the entire world focused its attention, and a young athlete's life could completely change. Because of this, no one gave an inch, especially England, which as the cradle of football, carried the weight of history, and could not accept the idea of losing or having its pride wounded by conceding a goal. The English attack returned even sharper and more aggressive, and Harry managed to push Korea's defensive line back. Seeing the opponents advance in droves and with serious weight, Yoo-jun showed concern, knowing that if they lost control of the midfield, the penalty area would be in extreme danger, and he tried every possible way to halt that advance. Known for his enviable stamina, Yoo-jun managed to keep up with the fierce English advance and yelled to the defensive system to block the play immediately. Centre-back Min-sek felt motivated by the command and didn't stand still, moving quickly to direct Hyung-nim not to drift to the wings, but rather to close down the marking through the center of the pitch. At 92 minutes of play, with 2 minutes of injury time, Yoo-jun's heart was practically bursting from sheer exhaustion. He remembered that even in his past life, Korea had managed to reach the quarter-finals, and he thought it would be a tremendous embarrassment if they crashed out in the round of 16 now that he was on the pitch. Deeply focused, he held his ground, certain they would secure the spot. The official commentator described the moment, saying that Yoo-jun received the ball but seemed completely out of breath, which prompted the English defenders to push up their line to press the exhausted boy. Yet, even under extreme tension and with every eye in the stadium fixed on him, the young star showed pure class and managed to shield possession until regulation time ran out. The final whistle blew, cementing a heroic 1-0 victory for South Korea over England. As soon as the match ended, teammate Jung-woo ran up to the protagonist to ask how long he had held onto the ball by himself, and Moon replied, impressed, that it had been for almost a full minute. Min-suk added that the guy was simply insane, but Yoo-jun asked to save the compliments for later, as all he wanted most at that exact moment was to rest. Before heading to the locker room, the entire team cheered and celebrated the historic victory that had dethroned the very cradle of football, knowing the feat would make front-page headlines in every newspaper. In the stands, reporter Jung-suh from the KBC network thought proudly that his instincts had never been wrong about the boy. He had proved capable of taking down the mighty England and had everything it took to become the new hope of Korean football. Yoo-jun himself could barely believe the result, calculating that they were now just 3 victories away from becoming the grand champions of the U17 World Cup. Later, back at the hotel, he felt completely shattered. He had pushed himself way past his limit, and there wasn't a single part of his body that didn't ache from sheer exhaustion. It was at that moment that his agent Ji-ho called with updates, letting him know that Paris Saint-Germain had sent an official proposal and partially accepted the guaranteed playing time clause. The agreement stipulated that once the athlete turned 18, the French club would mandate his participation in at least 5 matches, with a minimum of 30 minutes in each. The player evaluated that the offer was highly favorable and concluded that the age restriction was likely due to the fact that he was still in a growth phase, considering using this exact framework to negotiate with other teams. Ji-ho also shared that his performance had become the most talked about topic in the country, with numerous articles praising his display. Yoo-jun commented that the scoreline had been narrow, just 1-0, but the agent shot back, saying his ball control at the very end had left a massive impression on the fans, confessing that she herself had been captivated while watching the broadcast. He thanked her for the great news and hung up, thinking about how good it felt to be in the spotlight. After all, fans are an athlete's fuel, and in this industry, fame translated directly into money, which meant achieving absolutely everything. To him, this was an excellent, unexpected windfall, and if fame was the price to pay, he would gladly accept it. However, it didn't take long for the youngster to experience the downside of success. As he left the hotel heading toward the restaurant, he was abruptly pulled aside by an unknown man wearing an identification badge. The delegation's security guard intervened immediately, ordering the intruder to leave since he didn't have clearance. As he was being forcibly removed, the man begged for just 5 minutes to ask a few questions, leaving the athlete reflecting on how these strange people were already trying to take advantage of him, deciding he would need to be much firmer regarding his privacy from then on. Once in the restaurant, Yoo-jun ate while feeling a bit down. He didn't exactly miss his mother's cooking, but he missed her dearly, mostly because the local dishes were terrible. Suddenly, an elderly gentleman approached the table, saying he would like to talk, and claiming he had received permission from the coach to come in. Suspicious, the player told the man to stop lying, or he would call security immediately. Surprised and a bit shocked, the man questioned whether he would really call the guards on someone like him. Minutes later, the venue's security guard returned and confirmed that the gentleman's access pass was official and entirely legitimate. Dying of embarrassment, Yoo-jun apologized profusely, justifying that he never could have imagined a figure of such importance would come to find him in person. The visitor accepted the apology and mused that a promising athlete really did need to protect himself. The young player knew there was no way he couldn't be cautious. After all, the Manchester United of 2009 was a legendary squad packed with superstars, still under the command of the historic manager Alex Ferguson. The man then formally introduced himself as Gary Eakes, the academy director of Manchester United. Yoo-jun introduced himself as well, and the director got straight to the point, praising the boy's impressive skills and offering an immediate contract with a base salary of around 4,000 euros per week for 5 years, alongside a separate annual meeting to renegotiate the figures. The boy mentally calculated that 4,000 euros back then was equivalent to about 20 million won a month, realizing just how badly the English side wanted him in their squad. Playing for Manchester United would be perfect for his professional development, and there was no reason to refuse. But there was one crucial catch. The man sitting there was the academy director. Yoo-jun asked where his trajectory at the club would begin, and Gary explained that the plan was to integrate him into the U18 team, with chances of moving straight up to the U20s or the reserve team if he showed strong performances. The protagonist confirmed his suspicion that he still had a long way to go before making his professional debut. He understood the demands of a giant club, but he had no intention of passively accepting the terms. He responded firmly, stating that he had no intention of being limited to the youth level and that he demanded a guaranteed opportunity in the first team. Gary poured some coffee at the table and smiled, commenting that he loved the audacity of this rookie trying to negotiate like that, and that the more he got to know him, the more he liked him. The director explained that the conversation would have to stop there for now, since guaranteed playing time required the consent of the first team manager, and convincing Alex Ferguson would take some time. He said goodbye, noting that he would be back in touch through the player's agency, and Yoo-jun politely thanked him for the opportunity. The midfielder thought about how exhilarating it was to receive offers from major scouts after every match played, feeling incredibly hyped for the upcoming quarterfinal challenge against Spain, determined to shine once more to secure the victory. Spain was the home of powerhouses like Barcelona and Real Madrid, a nation that competed for the apex of world football directly with the English Premier League. To any lover of the sport, in the year 2009, the Spanish national team represented a single phrase, tiki-taka. As soon as the match began, the Spaniards put the famous tactic into practice with absolute mastery. Midfielder Alejandro Serra commanded the technique perfectly, receiving short passes, advancing with pace, and precisely distributing the ball to the next teammate. With this mesmerizing style, Spain maintained possession and prevented Korea from playing, naturally creating offensive moves in search of a goal through a perfectly integrated tactic between attack and defense. Left winger Jose Barala attempted a cross, but Yoo-jun intercepted the ball once again, leaving his opponent completely irritated. The reason was simple. Yoo-jun knew the weakness of tiki-taka perfectly. The Korean national team was building a literal defensive wall around whoever held the ball, banking on an ultra-defensive brand of football to counter the Spanish style. When facing such a well-structured defense, tiki-taka turns into nothing more than an endless exchange of passes until the team gets caught in a counterattack. Yoo-jun knew this because he came from the future, but in that year of 2009, nobody had a clue that things worked this way, and he intended to keep that secret to himself. Watching from the bench, Spain's coach, Ricardo Soler, commented that the defense was overwhelming and wondered if the boy truly knew the weak points of his system. In truth, Yoo-jun himself was curious about the outcome. That kind of defensive football is what theoretically weaker teams use against stronger ones, and coach Yong-woo had simply chosen that option out of caution, not necessarily because he knew it was the rival's weak spot. Yet, right in that moment of distraction, Ferran Lopez managed to drive forward, dragging 3 Korean markers with him, and unleashed a thunderous strike. Luckily, the ball rattled the crossbar and went out. Yoo-jun took a deep breath, thinking that no matter how they played, at the end of the day these were just 15 to 17-year-old boys on the pitch. You couldn't call it a top-tier defense, but the same went for Spain's tiki-taka. The second half began at a 0 deadlock, and the situation barely changed, with the Korean wall still completely blocking the Spanish game. The Korean goalkeeper shouted relentlessly for the defense to blind the opposing striker's view. The striker managed to get a shot off, but Singmin made another great save. However, thinking things would stay under control was a mistake, as the situation soon began to deteriorate. Yoo-jun noticed the team was doing nothing but defending, and that the boys were starting to run out of steam, creating the perfect storm for mistakes to happen. If a blunder occurred in the defensive third, it would turn into a goal instantly. Even as an amateur, he needed to think of a solution, and he remembered an ace up his sleeve he could play. Since Korea was pinned back in their defensive zone, no attacking opportunities arose, meaning he couldn't see the golden zone, and scoring was a pipe dream. Decisive passes were also being cut off, leaving them with nothing to do but pass, defend, and control the tempo. That was when he remembered the Spain side that dominated the world from 2008 to 2012, and how they only had one enemy who managed to go toe-to-toe with them, a player in his prime who distributed passes while pulling the strings from the back, the greatest deep-lying playmaker of all time, Andrea Pirlo. In that match, Yujun decided he was ready to completely mimic the Italian maestro's style. While the match remained tied, Korea showed absurd signs of fatigue from defending so much. In the middle of a pass intended for Jungsuk, a player's foot locked up due to sheer exhaustion, and Spain intercepted the ball. Capitalizing on their rivals' tired legs, Spain pushed their attacking line up and flooded the midfield with players, making any short passes nearly impossible. Up in the VIP boxes, Deem, the scout, already on his 5th bottle of wine, commented that the Koreans' movements had slowed down significantly. Mark agreed, saying their stamina had drained faster than usual because they spent the entire time defending. In the stands, Gary added that, meanwhile, Spain was moving the ball at a much faster tempo, using a clear strategy of waiting for the opponent to collapse. Watching everything intently, Golgoskia, the chief scout of Paris Saint-Germain, noticed that Yujun's position seemed deeper than usual and was intrigued by what the kid was plotting. The Koreans set up a pyramid-shaped defensive line, and Yujun positioned himself right at the apex. He drew inspiration once again from Andrea Pirlo, the most elegant playmaker in history, who didn't just look at the opponent in front of him, but at the furthest point on the pitch, commanding the game from the deepest area with passes that seemed like miracles, like a true regista. If all short passes were blocked, the solution was to send the ball out of the tiki-taka pressure zone. Without looking at his direct opponent, Yujun looked for space behind the defensive line, aiming straight for Hyung-nim. The striker, Hyung-nim, who was suffering under heavy marking, was already discouraged, thinking the ball would never reach him, as he had only received 2 passes the entire game. That was the cruelest situation for a forward, complete isolation. He ran and stopped restlessly, trying to shake off his marker, but was completely neutralized by Spain's shadow marking, leaving his morale in the dirt. He knew he would never score if the ball didn't arrive, and he began to think this was Korea's limit. That was when Hyung-nim caught Yujun's eye, that focused look of someone ready to pull off a play, spotting something no one else could see. Way up front, he saw the golden zone. No one on the pitch knew what Yujun was planning, but the moment their eyes met, Hyung-nim felt the ball was coming and bolted toward the Spanish penalty area. When they saw the ball cross the entire midfield and land perfectly in front of Hyung-nim, the Spanish defense panicked. Even with a defender draped over him, Hyung-nim struck the ball firmly into the back of the net, celebrating like he never had before in his life. All around, everyone was commenting on how insane the shot was. Yujun approached jokingly, asking if his teammate had read his movement and made a clever run, admitting that even he hadn't expected that one. Hyung-nim was speechless, and when asked by Yujun if he had completely frozen up, he confessed with tears in his eyes that he had halfway given up on the match, thanking him immensely for the pass. Yujun realized just how much pressure the boy was under. After all, no matter how much he moved, the chance just wouldn't come. Come to think of it, Hyung-nim was only 17, an age where one's psychological state isn't fully mature yet, making him look almost cute compared to his adult self. To break the tense mood, Yujun started shouting to the whole team that Hyung-nim was crying, mocking him, and calling over the reporters to capture the moment, which made the striker react by almost charging at him with a training cone in hand. After Korea's goal, Spain shifted into a much more ferocious press, but with a defense completely locked down in a 5-4-1 formation. The Koreans kept clearing the danger and managed to run down the clock. Despite a grueling 7 minutes of stoppage time, Korea held on to the 1-0 victory. Watching the match, Dudu commented that the Koreans had evolved well, but that Brazil had also grown since the Sendai Cup, and that it would be worth facing them in the semi-finals to seek revenge, as the two teams would clash in the next round. With their qualification confirmed, a lot happened behind the scenes. First, the national team received a highly bureaucratic message of encouragement from the Football Association, praising the best result in Korea's history at the U-17 World Cup, which made Yujun think that instead of a boilerplate text, they should have sent money. Shortly after, the team's security was reinforced, as the crowds grew and the number of reporters chasing them was bound to skyrocket, including the risk of more pitch invasions. Finally, agent Ji-ho had to travel to Nigeria in a hurry due to Manchester United making contact regarding Yujun. Over the phone, she apologized to the player, explaining that she was hired precisely to handle these situations, and that she was putting her work in Korea on hold to resolve this immediately. In the end, Yujun smiled, thinking that Ji-ho was extremely decisive and an excellent professional, indicating that, up to that point, everything was going incredibly well. The problem was that even before the agent could arrive, another club reached out to him. A representative from Manchester City scheduled an in-person meeting and introduced himself as Ali Abdul Rahman, a direct assistant to the club's owner, Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed bin Sultan, whom Yujun would just call Ali. Yujun immediately recalled that, at that time, Mansour was already the owner of City. Before beginning formal negotiations, Ali explained that he wanted to ask a question, as he had heard rumors that the boy had recently spoken with Manchester United. When Yoojun replied that he had, but confirmed he hadn't signed any contract, the assistant breathed a sigh of relief, commenting that it was excellent, as it meant there would be no need to pay a release clause. The player was left deep in thought, wondering if their Manchester rivals were really that rich enough to pay a buyout fee without blinking an eye had he signed with United. Ready for business, Ali began presenting the proposals, while Yoojun felt a shiver down his spine in the face of the empire's sheer power. Sheikh Mansour was a world-famous oil tycoon, and although City fans weren't very fond of him at first, with negative press almost daily and reporters mocking the club as a young billionaire's toy, the reality in 2023, when Yoojun was on the brink of death in his past life, was completely different. Hardly anyone hated the owner anymore, recognizing him as a true leader who took excellent care of the club. Back then, Yoojun didn't understand why, but now, seeing Ali offer cars, luxury penthouses, meals prepared by Michelin-starred chefs, 24-hour medical staff, and the best legal team in the United Kingdom, he was practically drooling, understanding the situation perfectly. The assistant added, casually, that those benefits were standard for any player in the squad. Given such heavy investment, Yoojun thought it was impossible for anyone to hate a man like that, and felt like signing on the spot. But he knew there was a crucial point to address. He pointed out that while the money and perks were great, he also required a clause guaranteeing on-field playing time. Ali responded promptly that they would guarantee it, as he was a player who deserved it, but made it clear there would be conditions. The first was that he needed to achieve unquestionable results during the current tour, and the second was that as soon as he arrived in England, he would have to bulk up with physical trainers provided by the club. Yoojun asked if he was serious, and just as he was about to sign, he felt as if his hand had been possessed and froze on the spot. He saw through the play. Demanding results in the tournament was a tactic to ease the pressure on the club, and guaranteeing playtime based on merit completely changed the player's leverage. Arriving with guaranteed minutes as an unknown prospect was vastly different from arriving as a U17 champion or MVP. Furthermore, the requirement to bulk up with their trainers wasn't a punishment, but rather the necessary process to give him the baseline physique to survive in the Premier League. Even though it seemed like the perfect proposal, he knew he needed to discuss everything with Jiho first, so he replied that he would review it calmly with his agent before giving a final answer. Ali agreed, shook his hand cordially, and said he would await their response. Later at the hotel, the striker Hyungnim was talking to his father while holding 2 soda cans, waiting for Yoojun. He reflected on how, both in the Sendai Cup and now, it was always Yoojun who saved the team, admitting to himself that he would have gone crazy in that last match if his friend hadn't been there. That sounded an alarm inside him, making him realize he needed to step up on his own and reach the global stage through his own strength, promising himself to focus on heavy training starting the very next day. When Jiho finally arrived to meet with Yoojun, she admitted that Manchester City's proposal was spectacular, good enough to sign immediately. Excited, the player questioned what was holding them back, but the agent surprised him by saying they wouldn't accept the offer. Faced with his insistence to know why, since the club offered guaranteed playing time, a great salary, and bonuses, Jiho revealed that the only thing bothering her was the owner himself, Mansour, wondering how long such a tycoon would actually care about the boy. Yoojun understood her doubt, knowing that back then, everyone distrusted the billionaire, thinking football was just temporary entertainment for him. However, because he knew the future, he knew Mansour would love Manchester City until his final days, investing relentlessly for 15 years and transforming the club into one of the biggest powerhouses in the world. When he asked if there was any other issue, and heard from the agent that there wasn't, Yoojun declared that they should make Manchester City their #1 priority. Jiho hesitated, asking if he was sure since it wasn't a simple decision, but the player asked her to trust him, guaranteeing that the owner would never abandon the club. Noticing the agent still seemed unsatisfied, but unable to reveal he came from the future, he changed the subject and said he was heading to training. Before leaving, Jiho handed him some documents listing all the clubs that had made contact over the past 2 days. Since it was too much to analyze individually, Yoojun only asked her to check which ones guaranteed playing time, and to let him know their responses. However, at that exact moment he felt a strange energy radiating from Jiho, and had a bad premonition that something was hidden in those papers. Back at the national team's training center, Yoojun focused his thoughts on the goal of proving to Manchester City that he deserved the requested playing time, for the results to truly show, and for him to win the U17 World Cup MVP individual award, which was the only thing that mattered to him there. Korea needed to reach the grand final. The semi-final match against Brazil, however, did not start the way he expected. The beginning of the game was extremely difficult, and Yoojun felt a heavy weight of accumulated fatigue. In a burst of pace, he failed to keep up with his marking on Ezekiel, who quickly passed to Dudu. The Brazilian forward advanced toward the channel of the Korean defense, leaving center-back Minseng completely indecisive about which way Dudu would try to cut. Surprising everyone, Dudu executed a magnificent flick over both defenders. Not even Yoojun expected such a genius play, leaving goalkeeper Sengmin to try for a miracle. But the ball went straight into the back of the net, opening the scoring at 1-0 for Brazil. Feeling the physical toll, Yoojun acknowledged that the Brazilians' rhythm and chemistry were sinister and had evolved drastically story since the Sendai Cup, with Dudu standing out as the most absurd player in the tournament, playing at a level that would certainly secure him the MVP award if they continued like this. Despite the blow, the Korean midfielder took a deep breath, aware that panicking wouldn't solve anything, and that he needed to focus on playing his best. At the 8-minute mark of the second half, with a spot in the final on the line, the tension between the two teams was at its absolute limit. With so little time left to achieve their goal, Yoojun knew he needed to spark the play that would change the course of the match. Even tightly marked, he managed to receive a pass and understood that this penetration was his only opportunity to make the biggest impact possible. Showing immense courage, he charged directly at Brazil's defensive wall, dodging defenders and calculating every movement as he clearly envisioned the red zones of the pitch. Anyone watching quickly noticed that Yoojun had evolved phenomenally. Since the Sendai Cup, he seemed like a different player, much more stable and secure in his abilities. Mentally focused, the midfielder smiled to himself, feeling he had finally reached the level he wanted, and delivered a perfect cross into the golden zone. Moon Jungwon seized the chance, rose firmly, and fired it straight into the back of the net, tying the match at 1-1. There were 35 minutes left, and from that moment on, the game would turn into an absolute war to see who had more legs and football left until the final whistle. The forward Dudu was completely furious with the equalizer, but that only served to make him even more motivated to chase the victory. By the 76th minute, the score remained level, and Brazil's pressure was suffocating. Their entire team had set up camp in Korea's defensive half, with absolutely no intention of backing down. Yoojun knew perfectly well that if he stayed pinned back, there would be no one to pull the strings in midfield, which meant they couldn't just sit back and defend. The exhaustion, however, was extreme. Just the task of marking Dudu was leaving him completely out of breath. Noticing his rival's fatigue, Dudu taunted him, telling him to forget about marking and go join the attack, because this time, he had let another kid take care of him. Yoojun fired back instantly, saying he wouldn't fall for that cheap talk, but he ended up getting distracted for a split second by the banter, allowing the Brazilian to receive the ball completely unmarked. Irritated with himself, the Korean thought that a Brazilian player was only dangerous when he opened his mouth, while Dudu, laughing at the situation, commented that he was the one who didn't trust anyone there, and laid a side pass off to Ezequiel. Korea's defense had the numerical advantage, and didn't need to panic, but Ezequiel shouted that it would take more than that to stop him, as that exact distance was his comfort zone. The forward shot deflected off a defender's leg and looped toward the goal, but Singmin was alert, and managed to secure the ball on the second attempt. Yoojun watched the play, impressed by the fact that Ezequiel's shot hadn't packed that much power back during the Sendai Cup. The game restarted with a long goal kick for Korea, and Jungsuk was the first to win the aerial duel, heading the ball straight to Yoojun, who was trying to reclaim control of the midfield. The midfielder's idea was to drive through the channel of the Brazilian defense exactly as he had done before, but he noticed something strange. The red zone wasn't appearing. Since that color represented hostility and direct engagement from opponents, its absence meant that if the Brazilians didn't rush him blindly, he wouldn't be able to predict where they would move. South Korea had discovered that the proper way to stop him was precisely that, corridoring him with composed, calculated movements. Unable to just stand still waiting for a tackle, Yoojun planted his feet and halted the play right in the center circle. At that exact moment, the commentator and the Brazilian midfielders wondered what the kid was doing, shouting for him to drive forward. Mentally, the midfielder calculated that if his pivot foot trembled at the moment of impact, the shot would come out weak, so he dug his cleats firmly into the turf. Everyone in the stadium noticed the shift in his posture, and was stunned by the sheer firmness of his stance. Up front, Hyungnim watched intently with sparkling eyes, dying to see the fruits of his teammates' evolution. From right there, right at the halfway line, Yoojun unleashed a mid-range rocket. The ball traveled in a flawless trajectory, and buried itself into the back of the net, securing a heroic comeback. He had envisioned that moment countless times in his thoughts, rehearsing what celebration he would pull off if he scored a goal in an official tournament like the World Cup. But in the heat of the adrenaline, he couldn't remember a thing, and just let out a raw, primal scream from the depths of his soul. Hyungnim ran over to hug him, joking that the goal was cool, but the midfielder was still a little way off from reaching his level. Yoojun laughed and replied that he only managed to score thanks to his friend, whom he teased by calling a candy addict, bragging that this finally proved who the better player was. The nickname sent the sugar demon, Hyungnim, chasing him across the pitch to demand an explanation. Up in the boxes, Deem slammed another bottle of wine and asked, half dazed, if this was real or if he was just too drunk, surprised because the kid had never attempted a shot from that distance before and seemed to be hiding his true cards. Meanwhile, Mark analyzed the play coldly, thinking that the kid's finishing data was accurate and that he was simply evolving too fast, making it impossible to predict how far he would go by the end of the tournament. Brazil went all out into attack for the remaining time, playing with a desperate anything-goes mentality, but Yoojun organized the team, shouting for everyone to just defend and bleed the clock. In the 5 minutes of stoppage time, the Brazilian squad attacked overwhelmingly, showing incredible grit and a desire to go higher in the competition, but their efforts weren't enough. The referee blew the final whistle, sealing the 2-1 scoreline for Korea and securing their spot in the grand final. After the whistle, Dudu approached Yoojun, but not to taunt him. The forward asked with a serious expression if the midfielder would like to play with him at Barcelona in the future, explaining that he was currently at Santos but would transfer to the Spanish club in a year or two, and that together they could make the absolute most of Yujun's passes. Yujun found the invitation amusing, thinking the Brazilian had barely arrived and already wanted to dictate who would finish his plays. He concluded that if Barcelona's board itself didn't make an official offer, he shouldn't jump the gun. Not wanting to give a definitive answer to something uncertain, he patted Dudu on the back and commented that if they did end up playing together, he would feed him plenty of passes, provided the forward held up his end of the bargain. Dudu agreed and said that since he would still spend some time at Santos, he would think about it calmly. Yujun was left intrigued, wondering if his rival was serious enough to put Barcelona on the back burner, and realized that the more he evolved, the greater the interest from European giants would be. Bidding farewell to the star player, he promised himself he would have that elite tier of players chasing him soon enough. Later in the dorm room, the midfielder used a small notebook to write down his tactical observations, logging that the golden light appeared, on average, more than 10 times per match, and that if he had passed the ball with more precision, he would have picked up 3 or 4 more assists in the game. He was also organizing the week's training schedule, setting Monday for finishing fundamentals and Tuesday for control and accuracy, trying to find another attribute to improve. He knew passing had the golden zone and tackling had the red zone, leaving only finishing, though he knew expecting a special zone for shots would be asking for too much. Suddenly, Agent Ji-ho burst into the room, saying they needed to talk about something urgent. When asked if it was about the contract, she confirmed it, explaining they had received feedback from Manchester United and the provisional contract from Manchester City. As she handed over the papers, Yujun gasped. The documents were completely pitch black. He asked if she had printed them in different colors on purpose, but Ji-ho looked at him strangely, asserting that the sheets were entirely white. The player realized instantly that this was a new color only he could see, though he still had no idea what its function was in the system. Refocusing, the agent informed him that first of all, Manchester United had rejected their request, claiming they could not guarantee the required playing time via a clause. This immediately prompted Yujun to question the exact reason behind the Red Devils' refusal. The conversation with Ji-ho made it clear that while everything else was perfect, the major issue Manchester United saw was his goal-scoring ability. After all, football is now in the era of the attacking midfielder, the player who links the midfield and the attack, an advanced figure with an eye for goal. Since Yujun had only managed a single goal in 6 matches, United's rejection was understandable. On the other hand, the contract offered by Manchester City looked different, glowing in a very light gray color on the documents. When asked about this proposal, Ji-ho explained that City would guarantee 3 matches and 45 minutes of playing time right at the start of the season. Being a provisional contract, this could increase over time. When she asked what to do about Manchester United, he suggested leaving the response open until the end of the U17 World Cup, since nobody knew what could happen by then. Ji-ho apologized for showing up so late and said goodbye. Left alone, he analyzed the papers and noticed a new color emerging in his vision: black. The United contract, full of poor conditions, glowed in a deep black, while City's contract, which guaranteed playing time, was gray. He thought that if the color represented risk, red would be more appropriate, but concluded that he would only understand it by playing. The colors he used to see in everyday life were now manifesting on the pitch, sparking his curiosity about how this black light ability worked. During the next morning's training, Moon didn't seem to be taking things very seriously, just bulldozing through everyone like an idiot, which prompted the assistant coach to yell at him to focus on the game. Meanwhile, Yujun didn't feel any major change in himself and thought the ability might not have fully awakened yet. It was then that Moon asked for the first ball to be released, and Yujun spotted a golden zone, realizing his teammate was positioning himself much better on his own and would shoot directly there. Behind the goal, however, he noticed a black cloud near the goalkeeper, indicating areas that were difficult to score in, while the light gray sectors looked easier. With the shooting spot already decided, he sent the ball straight toward the goal, replicating the movement from the match against Brazil. The bystanders thought he had evolved, but the ball went way wide and he ended up skying it. Jungwon ordered them to cancel that routine once and for all. Hyungnim laughed in his face, and Yujun himself assessed that he had overdone the curve. Though he noticed the goalkeeper hadn't even been able to react, he became certain that the black area indicated risk, which ignited hope that he truly could become an attacking midfielder. When the Korean national team's mock training ended, Yujun finally understood the logic. The closer to black, the higher the chance of the ball being blocked, and the lighter and grayer, the higher the chances of scoring. It would be a tremendous weapon if used correctly. Right after, the coach announced that the next day would be the final, and told everyone to rest. But the mood among the squad was one of pure dejection and anxiety. Their opponent would be Argentina, boasting an elite generation that featured a devastating attack led by Paulo Dybala and Mauro Icardi. Jungwon reinforced the order to rest, but the truth was that no high school student could relax before a final like that, and the night promised to be restless. Moon, one of the most disheartened, was sighing on the balcony when Yujun appeared with a coffee, joking that he could hear his sighs from all the way down the hallway. Moon tried to control himself, but soon sighed again, admitting that nervousness was eating him alive. as a defeat would mean the end of everything. Yoo-jun disagreed, reminding him that reaching the final was already the best result in the country's history. Moon, however, vented that unlike his friend, he hadn't achieved anything yet, and no clubs had contacted him. Realizing his teammates' anxiety about the future, Yoo-jun understood that playing with that mindset would turn a winnable game into an impossible mission. He called Moon an idiot and explained that the world only remembers first place, asking if he remembered who the runner-up of the 2006 World Cup was. Moon remembered it was France, and Yoo-jun added that a victory in the final would change everything, reaffirming that his friend was good enough and telling him to go to sleep. Thinking of getting some rest himself, Yoo-jun stretched and spotted Hyungnim just below, looking pensive. He approached, sat beside him and asked what was troubling him. Hyungnim tried to deflect, but the two quickly began trading friendly banter, until Hyungnim admitted he was doubting whether they could actually win the match. Yoo-jun assured him that even if they lost, plenty of clubs would look for him, but Hyungnim revealed he had a personal reason to win and would only share it after the final. Respecting the mystery, Yoo-jun accepted that worrying wouldn't solve anything. Before they went to sleep, he told his friend to leave the victory to him. For the first time, Hyungnim didn't get annoyed and looked genuinely happy. The moment of destiny approached, and the U-17 World Cup final finally arrived, bringing together everyone's stories, dreams, and reasons to win. The commentator announced that Korea had advanced by creating literal miracles at every stage and was now one step away from the top of the world. But they were facing Argentina, the highest scoring team in the tournament. The players took the pitch and warmed up individually. Before the opening whistle, the coach gave clear instructions for Yoo-jun to hold his position in the center, focus on passing, and avoid pushing forward into the attack. Yoo-jun mentally agreed that a completely defensive posture was the best choice against Argentine power, but he decided to act on his own, leaving the coach wondering what on earth that idiot was planning. The moment he received the ball, Yoo-jun charged forward with determination against the Argentine defense, aware that he had evolved but still needing to discover on the pitch what he could do with what he was seeing. He infiltrated the open space and passed to Hyungnim, immediately demanding the ball back. The Argentine defense rushed to close the gap, but since Yoo-jun hadn't shown any finishing ability until then, they lowered their guard. Not even the Korean coach knew what he was capable of. Amid a view partially obstructed by defenders, in the very first minute of the match, Yoo-jun finished with precision into the bottom corner of the goal, exactly where the black zone wasn't. The stadium erupted at the unbelievable early goal, proving the effectiveness of reading the black areas. On the pitch, striker Mauro Icardi was left in shock, and Paulo Dybala commented that he had never heard of Yoo-jun having that kind of finishing, showing fear of losing the match. However, Madila calmed his teammates, saying they just needed to score a goal of their own to fix everything. After all, Argentina had always been at the center of every footballing era, a nation that dictated the global standard, from the genius of Maradona dominating matches single-handedly, to the era of Messi, consolidating a legacy passed down from generation to generation. Argentina restarted the game, pushing through the middle and upping the tempo to regain control of the match. Up in the VIP area, Deem and Mark watched everything closely. Deem commented that this was completely unexpected, as he was certain the Koreans would deploy a defensive strategy, and expressed surprise at the first-minute goal. Mark agreed that the strategy was surprising, but highlighted the timing of the infiltration and the angle of the shot as pure talent from the boy. On the pitch, Yoo-jun was struggling to chase down Dybala, stunned by the absurd speed of that boy with the pitiful face. At the same time, Dybala was deeply concerned and felt the need to stick to Yoo-jun like glue, knowing that letting him break free would undoubtedly lead to another goal. When Madila received a pass, Yoo-jun shouted for his teammates to close in on him, and Korea quickly applied pressure in a 2-on-1 situation. However, Madila slipped past them effortlessly, looking as though he were surfing across the grass. Yoo-jun wondered to himself how this guy in his original timeline hadn't become a world-renowned talent with that level of skill. Madila invaded the Korean box with ease, and despite the defense's attempts to contain him, he found the pass to Mauro, who finally ruffled the back of the net for Argentina. At the 23-minute mark of the first half, the Argentines erased the deficit and equalized. Yoo-jun analyzed that their attack was simply too strong. If you stopped one, two others would burst forward. If you stopped two, the remaining one would settle it. Stopping 3 elite players seemed like an almost impossible mission. Shortly after, John tried to connect a pass to Yoo-jun, but Madila anticipated it explosively and intercepted the ball. Seeing that his opponent's bursts of speed were unpredictable, and that insisting on the impossible would be a waste of time, Yoo-jun decided that instead of dropping back and taking a beating on defense, he would ramp up the attack to clash head-on. He managed to dispossess Madila, who actually seemed excited by the challenge, but Dybala immediately latched onto Yoo-jun, warning him that he would be under tight man-marking. Yoo-jun noticed his rival's absurd reaction times, and understood that the first goal had only happened because nobody was paying attention to him. With a marker stuck to him like that, things were going to get difficult. For the time being, he tried to just move the ball around, but Hyungnim was completely surrounded. The pass ended up going to Moon, who took a shot from right there, but the keeper saved the low ball as it scraped across the turf. Argentina's tactics were clear. They put a marker on Yoo-jun to block his shots and infiltrations, left Moon free knowing he lacked exact finishing ability, and focused the rest of their strength on marking Hyungnim, blocking every path. It felt like he and Moon needed to rescue Prince Hyungnim, who was trapped by the Argentine defense. By the 16th minute of the second half, the score remained tied. Another pass came toward Yoojun, accompanied yet again by Dybala's tight marking. With Hyungnim neutralized, and Moon free but lacking accuracy, it was hard to expect anything from the attack. Amid these thoughts, Medela stole the ball again, prompting Yoojun to warn himself that if they kept doing nothing but defending, his team would be the first to break. They had to find a way to turn the tide. In the stands, Gary was watching alongside his assistant, who commented that it was impossible for Korea and Yoojun to beat Argentina. Gary countered, saying that the impossible is just an excuse for those who give up, and judging by the look and grit in Yoojun's eyes, he knew the boy hadn't given up. The assistant questioned what he could possibly do with that man marking closing down the passing lanes, and Gary replied that there was one thing he hadn't tried yet. On the pitch, Yoojun couldn't see the golden zone anywhere, and his energy was reaching its limit. Dybala lunged into a tackle and managed to dispossess him, leaving the ball loose. Everyone rushed toward it, and Argentina was about to get there first, but Yoojun came up with a quick plan upon confirming one fact. It took his opponents about 3 seconds to recover a loose ball, which meant the space around him became completely empty since he wasn't much of a dribbler. The opponents judged that a single marker was enough to stop him, focusing more on checking passes and marking the others. Jung-suk managed to connect a pass to Yoojun, who advanced conscious of the fact that he had always played based on his immense vision and effort, never focusing on dribbling. Dybala came in to mark him tightly from above again, and a red zone appeared, indicating he was about to slide tackle. Yoojun realized that if he bypassed him, the area behind would be deserted. Echoing Gary's thought that he needed to carve out his own path, Yoojun faced the red zone head-on, worked the spaces around it, evaded Dybala's slide tackle, and broke right past him. As he advanced into the Argentine box, the tight marking suffocating Hyungnim scattered, and the defense opened up. This was the chance to run. Hyungnim managed to slip away from the defenders, and Yoojun, seeing the opponent's rearguard completely shattered, spotted the golden zone and delivered a perfect cross. Hyungnim controlled it on his chest and unleashed a rocket. The goalkeeper was in the right position, but couldn't hold on to it. It was Korea's second goal, putting the score at 2-1 against Argentina in the 34th minute of the second half. A little over 10 minutes remained for Argentina to chase an equalizer or a comeback. The situation was unusual for the Argentines, who had always been the predators, and now had to race against the clock. In the 83rd minute of the match, Medela felt the desperation and the need to hurry, and it was precisely in this moment of distraction that Yoojun managed to take the ball from him. He knew his rivals weren't used to being hunted, and that Korea just needed to withstand the pressure right now. The match remained tense, with an anxious Argentina pressing forward, and Korea forming a literal wall. In the 2 minutes of stoppage time, the clash became brutally difficult, and in the final moments, the Argentines unleashed one last dangerous shot, but the goalkeeper, Singmin, held on tight. The final whistle echoed, and South Korea emerged as the grand champion. During the award ceremony for the 2009 U17 World Cup, South Korea's name was announced as the world champion country, and the players lifted the trophy with pride. Yoojun reflected that his only previous experiences had been in school tournaments or the Sendai Cup. This was his first real international competition, the first step of his true story. Next, the announcement of individual awards began. Thinking about the golden boot given to the top scorer, Yoojun looked to the side and saw the obvious. Hyungnim was already up there, looking smug, receiving the trophy for scoring a downpour of goals in the tournament. Hyungnim approached teasingly, asking if his friend had ever touched anything like it, and if he wanted to stroke his little prize. Yoojun didn't hesitate, and playfully told his teammate to go screw himself. Finally, the time came to announce the tournament's best player. Yoojun knew that the tournament MVP was the minimum condition required by Manchester City, and that trophy would be undeniable proof that he was the best player in the competition, opening doors to other proposals besides Manchester's. When his name was called, confirming the award, Ali commented from the stands that the boy was simply unbelievable for actually managing to pull off the challenge. With the long U17 World Cup finally over, all that was left was Yoojun's own decision regarding his future. As soon as the tournament ended, Jiho departed for Korea immediately, claiming she had some pending matters to resolve. However, the one who came chasing after Yoojun right afterward was Moon, revealing that he had received 3 club offers. Yoojun congratulated him, but couldn't help complaining, asking if he realized it was 4 o'clock in the morning. Unable to contain his anxiety, Moon asked for advice on which path to take, and Yoojun wanted to know what the proposals were. The first came from the Chinese Super League, which was dismissed on the spot. The other was from Oberhausen in the Bundesliga, which Yoojun considered an option worth thinking about. Moon's great dilemma was the third proposal, from a club called Manchester City, which had recently been promoted from the 3rd to the 2nd division. Without hesitation, Yoojun firmly stated that he should go to that one, no matter what happened. Moon questioned if the team really promised something big, and his friend guaranteed it did, telling him to trust his word. Moon thanked him immensely for the advice and left. Alone, Yoojun reflected that in his past life, his teammate had played in the K-League, and that this transfer was a true stroke of luck, likely driven by the performance they had delivered together, something that would bear fruit for for Yoojun himself later on. Finally, back in Korea, the first thing Yoojun's father did during dinner was complain, saying that because the games took place in the early hours of the morning, he had almost died of sleep deprivation, dozing off at work. Yoojun explained that there was an 8-hour time difference, but his mother quickly slapped her husband's head, telling him to shut up because their son had just worked hard and returned home. Right after, she placed one of her delicacies on the table, which actually looked like pure burnt charcoal. Yoojun expressed his gratitude but found it strange that his agent was sitting at the table, completely smeared with rice, and asked what she was doing there. Ji-ho explained that she had come to confirm a few things and bring updates. Curious about what would make her arrive before him, Yoojun learned there were 3 pieces of good news and 1 bad piece, and he preferred to hear the worst one first. Ji-ho revealed that Barcelona had sent an offer, prompting the player to question if that was truly bad news. The agent placed the documents on the table and explained that the Catalan club did not accept the guaranteed minutes clause, due to strong opposition from the manager. Looking at the document, Yoojun noticed it was almost entirely covered in black energy, and accepted that if the manager was against it, there was nothing to be done. Moving on to the good news. The first was from Valencia, but that contract glowed in black as well. They offered 45 minutes across 5 matches, which indicated a genuine intent to sign him, but the paper remained dark. Yoojun questioned if Valencia, being a big-name club, would be desperate for a prospect like him. Ji-ho clarified that despite their prestige, their finances were in a massive deficit, which had caused failures in renewing contracts with crucial players like David Villa, David Silva, Juan Mata, Vicente and Joaquin, all of whom were at risk of leaving the team. Yoojun realized the club was essentially collapsing, and remembered that in his original timeline, before he died, Valencia had reached the point of fighting against relegation, concluding that it would not be a good destination. The next piece of good news was a revised proposal from Manchester United, promising 20 minutes in 2 matches. Yoojun scoffed, knowing that such an amount of time only served to substitute in at the end and run down the clock in already lost games, concluding it wasn't worth it. Finally, Ji-ho presented the last proposal, coming from Manchester City. When the paper touched the table, the proposal glowed in a very light gray, with the black energy almost entirely dissipated. The weekly wage had doubled, there were incentive clauses, and the playing time had risen to 225 minutes, which basically made him a starter. Even so, he wanted to know where Hyungnim was going, thinking that if City had also contacted him, the two could play together again. A few days later, at the Korea Football Association in Jongno, an award ceremony was held for the youth national team to express gratitude to the young players who had given everything for their country. While the officials gave speeches, Moon dozed off deeply. During the event, the team received a certificate and a cash prize, with the coach holding a check for 30 million won. Moon commented that he thought he was going to die of boredom from all that bureaucracy, and Min-sung added that he would rather face Argentina again than have to endure it. Soon his teammates began to surround Yoojun, asking where he would go, as rumors claimed major clubs were fighting over him. Min-sung asked him to share the secret, promising that no one would leak it, but Yoojun shot back, saying that it was precisely because he knew Min-sung would spread it immediately that he wouldn't say a thing, on top of the fact that he hadn't made his final decision yet. In that moment of distraction, Yoojun ended up bumping into a man and apologized, but froze upon realizing it was Heo Jungwoong, the renowned head coach of the senior Korean national team, and the confirmed commander for the World Cup in South Africa. His instincts as a focused employee kicked in immediately, and he gave a respectful bow. The coach asked humorously if the boy knew him, and Yoojun replied that there probably wasn't anyone who played football in the country who didn't know him. Jungwoon praised him, saying the youngster was good not just with the ball at his feet, and excused himself to pass with the other directors, promising to chat with him next time. Watching them leave, Yoojun wished them well and thought that, at the very least, he had caught the commander's eye, becoming excited about the real possibility of a call-up. Seeing that scene, Min-sung and Moon joked that the circuits in Yoojun's little head seemed to have stopped working. Later, while heading down toward the building's entrance waiting for his agent, Yoojun ran into Hyungnim. He nudged his friend and asked what he was doing there, receiving the answer that he was waiting for his father. Yoojun called in the promise made before the final, reminding him that he needed to pay his debt and share his secret. Hyungnim smiled and revealed that his bags were packed for the Premier League, the wildest and most competitive league in the world, where battles are fierce and there are no absolutely strong or weak teams. In the original timeline, Hyungnim had gone to Hamburg, but now his destiny had shifted because Yoojun had interfered with the future once again. Stepping into English football at 17 required absurd courage. Aware of how hard he himself had been fighting to get playing time guarantees in his contract, Yoojun asked if his friend was going with any clause of that kind. Hyungnim replied that he wasn't, as he intended to prove his ability in training, and doubted they would dare leave him on the bench. Yoojun smiled, thinking that only idiots changed the future that way, and joked that he should have negotiated better, immediately asking which club it would be. When Hyungnim announced he was joining Tottenham Hotspur, Yoojun stammered in shock, repeating the name of the team several times. It felt like a design of fate, because in the original timeline, when he was much older, that was the very club he had played for. Hyungnim's father honked the horn, calling his son, and as they said goodbye, Yoojun internally lamented that they wouldn't be playing for the same team, leaving only a farewell for now. now. He advised his friend not to tarnish Korea's name in England, and Hyungnim shot back, saying he wasn't an idiot like him, leaving a final warning to meet again in the senior national team. Watching his teammate drive away, Yujin felt his chest lighten. His friend never minced words, but that conversation lifted the weight of his overthinking. He realized he just needed a little bit of courage to define his next step. As soon as Jiho finally pulled up in her car, Yujin looked at her firmly and announced that the decision was made. He was going to play for Manchester City. With a satisfied smile, the agent replied that it was an excellent choice. Weeks later, on a cold day in December 2009, the two crossed the gates of Incheon International Airport, and the young talent left Korea behind, bound for his new destiny. His destination was Manchester, the home of football. The player Yoo Jun was finally arriving at the Manchester City training ground, and as expected, the infrastructure was on another level, boasting an impressive number of football pitches. However, Jiho warned him that what he really needed to see was the Etihad Stadium, the stage where the young South Korean would be playing from now on. Since time was tight, Jiho rushed the boy, who was looking around thoughtfully. Shortly after, director Ali welcomed him with great enthusiasm, saying it was an honor to see him again. The first step of the meeting was the most important, reviewing the contract. Nervous as he was, Yoojun checked the paperwork and signed, making his move to the club official. Ali celebrated the moment, welcoming him and confirming that he was now officially a Manchester City player. A few days later, the youngster reported for the start of training. He underwent simple medical examinations, revealing a bit of a fear of needles, and soon headed to the gym to meet the fitness coach Paul Santini. The trainer praised his test results, but warned that the athlete needed to seriously build muscle on those skinny, stick-like legs, asking if he had ever trained with weights before. Faced with a timid response from the boy, who admitted he didn't know where to start, Paul reassured the youngster, saying most players were like that, and that he would take care of his development. Later on, Yoojun was already seen struggling through squats. While the boy complained, Paul demanded he hold the weight, stating that machines were for amateurs, to which the young man fired back that an amateur was exactly what he was. At the end of the workout, with his legs destroyed, the professional recommended a massage to relax, but warned that the pain was necessary for muscles to grow. Next, the player went to the office of the health coach, Oliver Bran, who told him to lie on the table. The athlete actually thought the environment seemed calmer than the gym, but was soon startled by a heavy-handed massage, taking an elbow right to the middle of his back. Oliver commented that his muscles were full of knots, and wished him good luck for the following day. Yoojun's next commitment would be an afternoon training session with the reserve team, a perfect opportunity to measure the strength of his new teammates. Arriving at the massive pitch, he noticed the atmosphere seemed relaxed and spotted striker Robson, a player of immense talent who had been suffering from injuries and a terrible run of form at the club, which ultimately relegated him to the secondary squad. Shortly after, the reserve team manager, James Barry Murphy, introduced the South Korean to the group, who reacted with half-hearted applause. James explained that the training would be an 11 against 11 match, split into two 30-minute halves with no specific tactics. Stepping onto the pitch as a starter, Yoojun took control of the ball but was immediately ran over by a giant defender. As his teammates shouted, demanding the newcomer pay attention, the youngster realized he had been arrogant to think he would be testing their level. In reality, it was those space-obsessed professionals who were testing his. Shifting his mindset to professional football, the boy began competing for every ball like a madman, even while taking elbows and suffering from his weak physique. In a moment of pure genius, he picked out an unbelievable pass in a golden zone of the pitch. The ball was perfect for Robson, who controlled it with ease and scored, thoroughly impressed by the quality of the pass that left him face-to-face with the net. In the stands, the club's manager at the time, Roberto Mancini, watched everything closely alongside the head coach Zeke. The coach informed him that Robson would return to the first team in a month or two, but the manager's attention was entirely focused on the Korean rookie. Mancini knew the signing had strong backing from the owner, but he hadn't expected much from the boy, thinking he was just another ordinary midfielder. However, seeing the precision of that assist, the manager changed his mind and questioned whether it was normal to see young prospects training with such desperation. Zeke replied that most talents grew complacent and ended up destroyed by the competitiveness, but revealed the rookie's insane routine, which involved tackling 3 physical training sessions in the morning before heading to the pitch in the afternoon. Impressed by the boy's stamina even after such a heavy workload, Mancini ordered them to keep a close eye on him. If the youngster could maintain that dedication for a month without getting injured, he would be prepared to make his first team debut. Over the following weeks, Yoojun continued to kill himself in training. He started by doing 20 reps of barbell squats with 80 kilograms, followed immediately by Oliver's painful elbows in the massage room to relieve the muscle knots. Even with his legs barely obeying his brain, he stuck to the routine for an entire month, reaching an impressive milestone of 20 reps with 120 kilograms. Seeing this progress, Paul thought the boy's physique was developing perfectly and announced they would wrap up the strength training there. The trainer explained there had been a sudden change of plans, and the player, curious to know who had altered his routine, immediately headed to the head coach's office. Manager James Barry Murphy welcomed him into his office and told him to sit down, subsequently asking how the training was going. Yoojun replied that it was hell, but a bearable hell. well, revealing that he was actually adapting well to the routine by now. Hearing this, James announced they were going to put him in a match 4 days from then, against the Liverpool reserve team. The young South Korean left the room radiant, buzzing with the news that he would finally make his debut for the reserves. Shortly after, the manager was already in touch with Roberto Mancini, confirming he had scheduled the game for a date when the boss could watch closely and track the boys' development. On the day of the clash against Liverpool, the situation wasn't easy, and the scoreboard already read 1-0 to the opposition. On the pitch, Yoo-jun reflected on how he was still a midfielder with many flaws, acknowledging that his dribbling wasn't that good, his marking was flawed, and he still hadn't mastered the black zone to finish plays on his own. Even his regular passes weren't up to professional standards, but his great specialty was the assist. Spotting a golden zone, he ended up taking a punch to the face and was brought down by a Liverpool player, a challenge that earned the offender an immediate yellow card. Tempers flared, and the Manchester City players rushed in, ready to fight. The rival tried to justify himself by saying the rookie had only fallen because his physique was awful, to which Yoo-jun's teammate snapped back, telling him to stop using good arguments, since everything he said was an undeniable truth. Despite the blow, the youngster secured a free kick, and since it was too far from the box for a direct shot, he scanned the pitch until he spotted an opening in a golden zone. He struck the free kick straight into that area, and the striker, Mike, appeared like a rocket to send the ball into the back of the net, equalizing the game. Yoo-jun realized right there that the level was vastly different from the U17 World Cup, with much more powerful teammates and opponents, but he felt certain that he would grow immensely in that place. From the stands, Mancini and Zeke watched everything unfold, and the manager praised the boys' extraordinary passing, questioning if there was anyone in the reserve squad capable of doing the same. Zeke assured him that there was absolutely no one in the reserves, and when Mancini specified that he was asking about the first team, the assistant explained that the senior midfielders were all box-to-box players, with no one sharing the South Korean's specific role or passing quality. The boss admitted he needed someone with those characteristics, but Zeke reminded him that he had already requested a technical player, and the club had already signed David Silva. Mancini pondered that David Silva was indeed a complete and versatile midfielder, capable of initiating excellent plays and exploiting spaces in the opposition's defense. On the other hand, Yoo-jun had many weaknesses, but all of his attributes were concentrated into a single aspect of the game: passing vision. If David Silva was an expert at finding spaces that already existed, Yoo-jun was known for creating attacks that simply did not exist. Startled to realize he was comparing a rookie to a star of David Silva's caliber, the manager tried to calm himself down, but was interrupted by yet another play from the boy. Even while closely marked by two Liverpool players, the youngster spotted a corridor and delivered the pass. The opponents thought the touch would be useless, but Mike was already prepared in the golden zone, sprinting like a jet to score another goal, consolidating an excellent duo. Impressed, Mancini decreed that the club had found a long-term player and ordered Zeke to increase the youngster's training workload to improve his physique, in addition to starting him in every single reserve match from now on. In his debut, the boy had secured 2 assists. With his success, Yoo-jun earned his own accommodation, a comfortable house fully provided by the club right next to the training center. His highly protective mother insisted on coming along and moved in with him, and since the club also provided a personal chef, she didn't even have to worry about cooking. Early one morning, just before dawn, they were both awoken by the noise of construction work in the backyard. The youth quickly remembered what it was about. Days earlier, Paul Santini had warned him that he would be adding another workout block to his routine, and given the athlete's concern about being exhausted for matches, the trainer had handed him a piece of paper showing the blueprint for a swimming pool right in front of his house, explaining that the structure would be perfect for accelerating muscle recovery. Paul warned him that as soon as construction finished, his routine would jump from 3 to 4 daily training blocks. Yoo-jun was shocked to realize that Sheikh Mansour was on another level, building a private pool for a mere 17-year-old player. 3 months passed, and the loop of that intense routine continued. Yoo-jun had already accumulated 12 appearances for the reserve team, and was now facing Barcelona's secondary squad. During the match, Robson played a perfect pass to the South Korean, and when a Spanish defender lunged forward firmly to steal the ball, the youngster didn't back down. He withstood the shoulder-to-shoulder impact and kept moving. In the VIP area, Mancini celebrated his evolution, noting that the athlete's physique was on a whole new level and that it was time to move to the next stage. Upon returning home, the player saw the pool finally completed, and though he was happy, he knew he would now have to face the 4 daily workouts. Shortly after, the manager James visited him in person to take him back to the training center, as someone very important wanted to see him. The youngster was taken directly to Roberto Mancini's office. Standing before that man, who had been an instinctive striker and won miraculous titles as a player and even more trophies as an elite manager, left Yoo-jun so nervous that he gave an exaggeratedly formal bow. Mancini smiled and told the boy to relax, praising his recent performance of 11 assists in 12 games. The South Korean, who hadn't even stopped to count the numbers, thought about how he still hadn't scored any goals and had barely seen the red zones or utilized the black zone against those tough defenses, relying only on the rare golden zones. Humbly, he told the manager he was just doing his his best, but Mancini insisted it was pure talent and praised the boy's grit for enduring 4 daily training blocks while still playing so intensely at his age. Confused, Yoo-jun replied that there must be a mistake because he hadn't actually started the 4-block routine yet, at which point Zeke stepped in to warn him that the 4 shifts would begin exactly the next day. Surprised, Mancini wondered if the boy had achieved all that absurd physical evolution while facing only 3 workout blocks a day. Impressed by his dedication, the manager reached out and handed his personal card to the youth, telling him he could contact him directly if anything ever happened. Yoo-jun was completely in shock to receive a direct line to the boss and could barely contain his excitement. As they said goodbye, Mancini reinforced that he was eager to see his performance from then on. Leaving the office with a silly grin on his face, the South Korean thought he had made a great first impression, and that playing for the first team no longer felt like such a distant dream. He was determined to push himself even harder. As soon as the boy left, Zeke questioned his boss about why he hadn't brought up the call they received from the Korean Football Association regarding the World Cup call-up. A thoughtful Mancini changed his mind and brushed it off, noting that the boy's training load would increase even more the next day and that he was already at a much higher level compared to 3 months ago. When reminded by Zeke that the Korean Federation wanted his match records and an internal club evaluation, the manager was categorical and ordered them not to send anything to Mancini. Sending the youngster to the World Cup now would only delay his first-team debut, and it made no sense to burn out a prospect so early. His intention was to polish the boy exclusively for Manchester City, charting a fast and direct path to the top of the Premier League, where in a year or two the whole planet would know his name. Later on, Yoo-jun was practically drowning in his new pool while Paul Santini told him to relax his body. The youth complained, asking how he was supposed to relax when his feet couldn't even touch the freezing bottom of the water. But the training was interrupted by the arrival of Jiho. Paul, who was about to throw a fit over the interruption, completely changed his posture upon seeing the agent. Enchanted by her beauty, the fitness coach flashed a smile, called her Mademoiselle, and willingly excused himself, saying she could talk to the athlete for as long as she wanted. Yoo-jun found it amusing how easy the trainer was to read, stepped out of the pool, and asked if there was any news. Jiho wanted to know if he remembered Coach Youngwon, the manager of the South Korea senior national team, and revealed that a last-minute meeting had been scheduled with him. The player immediately deduced that the subject was the World Cup, and the agent confirmed it, explaining that the hasty meeting was set up precisely because Manchester City had refused to send his data. The boy found the club's refusal strange, but Jiho clarified that, to the team, releasing a player to a national squad means losing money and preparation time with no financial return. Even while understanding the club's logic, Yoo-jun heard from Jiho that she insisted on his participation in the tournament. The agent explained that the World Cup would bring invaluable match experience, increase his market value, create a massive Korean fan base, and, above all, transform his career. She reminded him that football legends like Pelé and Ronaldo conquered the world at 17, building unbeatable legacies from that point forward. The young midfielder agreed that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and that he needed to be greedy. Winning a world title as a developing athlete would boost his career trajectory phenomenally. He pondered that he didn't want to sacrifice his routine with the club, but Jiho guaranteed that the planning would continue, as they would bring Paul himself to the World Cup. Faced with doubts about whether the national team would accept this, the agent stated that if he fulfilled the federation's schedule, there would be no issues, especially since the national team manager knew very well the weight of having a reinforcement with 11 assists in 12 games for the reserves of a European giant. She made it clear that if South Korea did not accept the terms, they would simply pass on the World Cup, as the athlete's individual career was the absolute priority. The boy realized she was right and resolutely accepted the challenge. A month passed, and the Manchester City reserve team secured another victory, this time 2-0. At the end of the match, striker Mike praised the South Koreans' passing, to which he modestly replied that it had just been luck. The fans were thrilled with the new crop of talent, and Yoo-jun's numbers were overwhelming. From January to April, he played 17 matches, accumulating 13 wins, 4 draws, and 0 defeats, being responsible for almost every single assist for the team's goals. The experienced Robson approached to thank him for another goal on his tally, but brought bittersweet news. It would be their last match together, as he was returning to the first team. The striker joked, asking how he would survive without the rookie's assists, and predicted that at the rate the Korean was going, he would also move up a category the following year. The youngster just smiled and said he would keep working hard to meet him up there, knowing in his mind that the other players had no idea he already had specific playing time targets stipulated in his contract. As he prepared to board the team bus, Yoo-jun was stopped by manager James, who called him over to ride in his private car. Heading in the opposite direction of the training center, James commented on the end of the European season and the terrible wave of injuries that had depleted the first-team squad, including the starting striker and several other key players. The youth understood that this was why Robson had been promoted ahead of schedule, knowing that the period between April and May was critical for the physical wear and tear of professionals, but he was intrigued as to why he was receiving this information. His suspicions were confirmed when the vehicle parked, and he was led back to the club's main office. Stepping into the room, the youngster tried to to control his nervousness, but the task was nearly impossible. He wasn't just standing before Roberto Mancini, but in front of the entire first-team coaching staff of Manchester City. With a firm gaze and a satisfied smile, Mancini congratulated the boy and announced that he should get ready, because the time for his first-team debut had arrived. Meanwhile, at the Tottenham Hotspur training ground, a preparation match was fiercely underway. The reserve team striker, Harry Kane, delivered a sharp cross toward the box, sending the ball into a space where there was seemingly no one. However, the young Heung-min proved otherwise. Anticipating the play, he found the perfect breach in the defense and scored a beautiful goal. The staff on the pitch were impressed, wondering what kind of next-level movement that had been, recognizing that the boy truly had something special. During the rest break, Heung-min sat down completely exhausted, reflecting that the reserve level in England was no joke. He began to wonder how his rival Yoo-jun was faring at that exact moment, when Harry Kane approached with his phone in hand. The striker asked if he hadn't played with that boy in the U17 World Cup, and showed him some recent news. The portals highlighted Yoo-jun's magnificent performance, and Heung-min was shocked to read that his counterpart was already being promoted to Manchester City's first team. Feeling as though his rival were a monster straight out of fiction, the Tottenham youth put his fatigue aside and decided it was no time to stand still. He would push himself even harder to catch up to his compatriot. Back on the blue side of Manchester, Yoo-jun was reading the same headlines and asking his agent if it wasn't all an exaggeration. The newspapers practically guaranteed his presence in the first team, even though his name had only appeared on the squad list. Ji-ho replied that the technical detail didn't matter, because the simple fact that a 17-year-old was being considered for the senior squad of a club that size was enough to make the front page. She warned that the entire world would be watching the next match, the exact moment he would have to prove his worth. With the Korean national team manager Jung-won confirmed to be in the stands, she seriously warned him that he would need to play as if his very life depended on it. The midfielder joked that, from her tone, it didn't even sound like a joke, but the agent fired back that the situation was of extreme gravity. The next day's clash would be valid for round 37 of the Premier League, with only a single point separating Manchester City from Tottenham. The winner of the duel would practically punch their ticket to the Champions League, and a good performance there would place the youngster's name at the summit of world football. Analyzing the scenario, Yoo-jun searched his memories and recalled the original timeline of the 2010 to 2011 season. In real history, Manchester City had lost precisely to Tottenham and missed out on the Champions League qualification zone. He realized he had been drafted into a match historically destined for his club's failure, which meant he was the single variable capable of changing the destiny of that confrontation. On the day of the big game, the atmosphere at the Etihad Stadium was electric, with the stands completely packed. Manchester City took the pitch in a 4-4-2 formation, with Roberto Mancini seeking a solid and balanced structure. On the other side, Harry Redknapp's Tottenham adopted the same formation, but the commentators highlighted that despite the identical lineups, the manager's philosophies were completely opposite, and everyone wanted to see who would leave the pitch victorious. Behind the scenes, as he prepared for the warm-up, Yoo-jun found himself surrounded by football legends like Emmanuel Adebayor, Craig Bellamy, Carlos Tevez, Pablo Zabaleta, and goalkeeper Shea Gearing. The boy was struck by the sheer presence of the squad, but he stood his ground, knowing it was no time for nerves. Robson approached with a smile and joked, saying that the rookie had actually managed to make the step up, advising him not to faint from shock in front of the team's stars. The youngster shot back, saying that the game couldn't be that different from what he was already doing, but the moment he stepped onto the pitch and heard the deafening roar of 50,000 fans, the sheer impact almost made him freeze. Robson nudged his teammate, reminding him that he had warned him about the pressure and that he would get used to it over time. Regaining his focus, Yoo-jun smiled to himself as he realized he had finally reached the elite of world football. That pressure was exactly what he needed and wanted to feel, and he would do everything in his power to win. In the press box, Korean reporter Kwon Jung-sup proudly followed his compatriot's every step, already planning to secure an exclusive interview after the final whistle. The young midfielder started the match on the bench, but kept his eyes glued to the pitch, decoding every movement and studying the opponent's gaps. At last, the referee blew the whistle to signal the start of the first half, kicking off the battle that was worth Champions League glory.